Welcome to another episode of Murder Talk Radio. I am Parker Evans.
And I'm Victoria Evans.
And today we are talking 1999, Columbine, Truth and Myths. Sorry.
You all right?
Yeah, I said a frog in my throat.
The Columbine Massacre was a school shooting and attempted domestic terrorist bombing, often referred to simply as Columbine. This was perpetrated by students Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold on April 20th, 1999 at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado.
In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were widely reported to be members of something called the Trenchcoat Mafia, a clique of outcast misfits and a group of friends who were reportedly so named after one of their members' mothers bought them a trench coat, which is not the most amazing backstory to a group that has ever been.
It's not.
We're called the Trench Coat Mafia. Why you guys called that? My mom bought me a trench coat.
I always thought it was because of Manson.
No. Nope. Nothing to do with it.
We're going to get into this, but for a really long time, it was just Marilyn Manson this, Marilyn Manson, Columbine that, like...
I don't really remember that too much. I was in high school when this happened.
I was not.
There was a little of that, but I actually think Manson overstates how much blame he got for that.
Maybe he does. I was 6 when this happened, and, you know, when I actually learned about Columbine in high school when I got super into Marilyn Manson. So I learned about it through him, and I think that's why that's like my lens. So it is interesting, you know, learning about it as an adult.
I was a sophomore when this happened, and the very next year, my junior year, I sort of got in trouble. I didn't really get in trouble. I almost got expelled because I wrote a poem about violence, about school shootings, and the administration at my high school did not like my poem, even though it was ostensibly anti-violence. But there was a particular phrase that I used. I described gunshot wounds as Coca-Cola blossoms, and they did not like that.
That is so great.
Thank you.
I love your writing. I would love to hear the whole thing.
That almost got me expelled, that turn of phrase.
That's stupid.
Yeah.
Wow.
My dad threatened to sue.
You probably would have won.
I definitely would have won.
Knowing your family, but also just the case. Like,
yeah,
wow.
That was all stupid.
Coca-Cola blossoms. We should write a song called... No, we shouldn't. Never mind. Okay.
It's great. It was a great turn of phrase. It was a good poem. It was called Rage. It's good.
I really like that.
So anyway, reports about the Trenchcoat Mafia started because the father of Eric Harris, erroneously, he was wrong, which is your first indication as to how this shooting even happened in the first place. But the father of Eric Harris called 911 the day of the shooting and said that Eric was, quote, a member of what they call the Trenchcoat Mafia, which his father, again, was wrong about. They were not members of the group. They were outcast misfits who were reportedly bullied, and they did often wear trench coats. So it was easy to believe that they were part of a group of outcast misfits who called themselves the Trenchcoat Mafia. But it turned out not to be true. They did not have any real affiliation with the group. They do not appear in the group's 1998 high school yearbook photo. And if you click on the link in the description of this podcast, it'll take you to our article in Murder Pop magazine, and you can see this yearbook picture for yourself. They're not in it. And you would think if they were members of the group, they are in the yearbook, you would think they would be in the group photo. But they're not, because they weren't.
The funniest part about this photo is that I don't actually see anyone wearing a recognizable trench coat.
No, I don't
Like, no one's wearing a trench coat in the picture. They're wearing, like, a jacket or a t-shirt, like, 90s style. Like,
You were
no one's wearing a trench coat.
You were correct.
It's so weird.
They were friends with a few members of the group, particularly a kid named Chris Morris and a girl named Kristen. How do you think that pronane? How do you think that pronane? How do you think that pronane is pronounced? How do you think that name's pronounced?
Theobald.
Thibault?
Fabelt.
Thibault?
Fabelt, maybe?
Thigh?
Thiebault. I think.
Always with the
Fabelt.
names. But anyway, most of the Trenchcoat Mafia had graduated and left the school permanently by the time Harris and Klebold committed the Columbine Massacre.
Chris Morris had a part-time job at the local Blackjack Pizza restaurant, where he helped Harris get a job that summer after sophomore year, and Harris in turn got Klebold a part-time job working with him as a cook, and Harris was a good enough employee that he eventually was promoted as shift leader. Harris tried to recruit Chris Morris into the Columbine plot. But he played the whole thing off as like some big joke when Morris said no. And in the months following, leading up to the attacks, Eric Harris was also experimenting with napalm and tried to get Chris Morris to store the napalm at his house. Morris also refused to do this.
Some friend.
Talk about red flag.
I don't know. So it was a different era, and this was
was.
more normal at the time.
Yeah.
I did stuff like this with my friends as a teenager. We would go out and blow stuff up and shoot guns and
Yeah, I had two older brothers.
make
and
napalm, and
this
I
stuff.
I made napalm as a teenager.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, you told me about that.
Yeah.
Wild times. Better times in many ways, but
Yeah, I mean, it was just different. There wasn't really a big concern about terrorism or this kind of stuff, and I wasn't making it because I wanted to use it on anybody.
No,
it was like a fun experiment.
honestly,
sort of.
it's kind of like a science-y project.
Yeah, I mean that's what it was. We blew stuff up. We were blowing up like logs out in the woods.
I think that sounds fun.
Yeah, it was.
Not harming anyone.
Just the termites.
Yeah. Just the trees.
So Klebold once terrified his coworkers at Blackjack Pizza by bringing a pipe bomb into work with him. When they executed search warrants following the attack, 2 pipe bombs were found in Klebold's bedroom with names written on them. One named Vengeance, which there's a picture of in the article we have, and another was named Atlanta, presumably after the Centennial Olympic Park bombing on July 27th, 1996, which was a terrorist attack, which a lot of people don't know this, but this was explicitly conceived as a terrorist attack, and that was one of the influences that they had.
Yeah, it definitely has not been presented that way at all.
No.
It's just kind of been presented as a typical school shooting with some like broody teenagers, but I think that they were much, much more into manifesto the manifesto realm of like terrorism.
I actually think that's pretty common among school shooters in general. The article that this podcast is based on is part of a series that I wrote called A History of School Shootings in the United States. And we'll do a podcast on the Trends and Conclusions article at some point that kind of gets into a little bit of this, but the way that these have been presented in the media and by so-called experts on these events does not really hew towards what you might call the reality of the motivations of them. We just did the podcast on the psychopathology of the criminal mind, and it talks about at the end we talk about serial killers and mass murderers, and that they have a lot in common, In fact, they have more in common than they have not in common. The only thing they have not in common is that serial killers tend to kill people one at a time, and they take breaks in between. And mass shooters don't do that. They kill a bunch of people at once, and then they're usually killed. They usually kill themselves. Sometimes they're shot to death by police. They're very rarely arrested.
Yeah.
It does happen. Sometimes they get caught, but it tends to either be suicide or suicide by cop.
Yeah, they don't. Serial killers tend to have more of like a long-term secret life. There tends to be a sexual component to their crimes, but there is so much overlap.
I actually think that there's a sexual component to these school shootings, which we'll get into more in the second half of this, but Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold have a lot in common with Elliot Rodger, who committed the Isla Vista shootings, and who wrote an extremely misogynist manifesto in which he blamed being rejected by a girl who was like 12 years old for the shootings. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But they have a lot in common with that. There was a lot of like resentment. In particular, Klebold wrote a lot about being rejected by girls and that being part of his paranoid depression or whatever. I don't know. We'll get into that a little bit more. But leading up to the shooting, Harris and Klebold bought 2 9mm firearms, 2 12-gauge shotguns via straw purchase. A friend of theirs named Robin Anderson bought them a lot of these guns. She bought a 9mm high-point carbine rifle and 2 shotguns at a Tanner gun show. And she did this as a personal favor because they were too young to legally purchase the guns themselves, or at least that's what she told investigators after. And she also told them that she was under the impression that they were going to be doing target shooting, and she said she had no prior knowledge of their plans.
Harris's shotgun was sawed off to around 26 inches, and Klebold shortened his to 23 inches, which is a felony under the National Firearms Act, which makes it illegal for private citizens to possess a shotgun with an overall length of under 26 inches. Through another coworker at Blackjack Pizza named Philip, Klebold bought a Tech-9 handgun at a gun show on January 23rd, 1999 from Mark Maines for $500. He also bought accessories for the gun, including ammunition, magazines, and a holster and case.
Mark Maines also reportedly told Klebold and Harris both to keep their shotguns out of sight, as he realized they were too short to be lawful, although at 26 inches, that should be legal, because it's under 26 is not. So as long as it wasn't under, then Harris's was theoretically legal, but Klebold's wasn't. And Mark Maine's girlfriend, who is named Jessica Miklik, and Philip Duran are all in the Rampart Range video. This was released in 2003 by Jefferson County Sheriff's officials in the wake of calls from the Columbine Open Records Task Force to release more about the shooting. The Rampart Range video was shot March 6, 1999. It shows Harris and Klebold practicing with the same weapons that they would later use in the massacre. They were in the nearby foothills, which were known as Rampart Range, and that's where the video gets its name. And if you go to the article that we have in Murder Pop Magazine, you can see this video of Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold, Mark Maines, and Jessica Miklik shooting.
After the massacre, Mark Maines and Philip Duran were both charged with supplying a handgun to a minor and possession of a sawed-off shotgun. Maines was sentenced to 6 years, Duran to 4.5 years in prison. In exchange for their cooperation, With the investigation that followed the shooting, were no charges were filed against Robin Anderson.
Harris and Klebold both carried knives on the day of the shooting, but it's not believed that they used them. They had several knives on them. Harris had a dagger on his belt. He had a long knife taped to the back of his ankle. Klebold had a Cobra knife on his belt and a spring-assisted pocket knife in his right pocket. And in addition to the firearms and the knives, their plans for the attack involved explosive devices like propane tanks that were converted into bombs. The bombs were very crudely made, which is why they didn't work. And the large propane tank bombs were made at the last minute, which that might be why they all failed, although a lot of their pipe bombs failed to detonate as well, so it may just be that they were not very good bomb makers, which is a good thing. They would have killed a lot more people.
They also built a total of 99 incendiary devices, which varied in design, including devices made from carbon dioxide canisters filled with gunpowder called crickets, galvanized pipe covered in shrapnel, pipe bombs, and glass bottled Molotov cocktails. So for easy ignition, the various devices were primed with matches, and they taped match strikers. They had them taped to their sleeves. When they rubbed the strikers' tape onto their arms against the bombs, the match heads lit the fuse. So they definitely planned this out in kind of a weird little way.
The weekend before the shooting, Harris and Klebold, they worked their final shift at Blackjack Pizza Friday, April 16th, 4 days before the massacre. The morning of the attack, they bought 6 more propane tanks, and Harris was caught on a Texaco gas station security camera buying a propane tank at 9:12 a.m. And the car bombs that they made car bombs, which a lot of people seem to not know. They were constructed from 2 20-pound propane tanks, and pipe bombs, along with canisters filled with gasoline, were spread through the vehicles. 8 pipe bombs were in Klebold's car. 1 was in Harris's car. They placed propane tank bombs in the cafeteria, and they also left one as a diversion in a green belt near South Wadsworth Boulevard and Ken Curl Avenue. Only 2 went off, and both they were partial detonations because the ignition devices failed. One of them used an analog alarm clock as a detonation timer, which I thought was an interesting and weird detail.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they seemed like they clearly spent a lot of time messing with this stuff and trying to build it, but they also seemed like it came across as amateur.
Very amateurish.
So
They were high school students.
yeah. It has been speculated that if either of the bombs placed in the cafeteria had detonated as intended, the blast would have damaged the building's structural members, potentially collapsing the library into the cafeteria, resulting in hundreds of additional casualties and injuries among the 488 students in the cafeteria. Eric Harris's website contained explicit instructions on making effective Molotov cocktails and pipe bombs, and detailed the necessity of the extensive use of shrapnel to inflict maximum damage.
A friend of Eric Harris claimed that Wayne Harris, Eric's father, discovered a pipe bomb in his son's bedroom in the months leading up to the massacre, and a lawsuit later alleged that Wayne Harris found a pipe bomb and detonated it in an empty field more than a year before the massacre. As far as I'm aware of, no evidence was ever presented of that, and the Harris family denied the allegations, but Harris and Klebold, the families settled the lawsuits that were filed against them. The Harrises and the Klebolds contributed over $1 million from their homeowners insurance policy to a $2.5 million settlement in 2001. And in August 2003, the families of 5 other victims received additional undisclosed settlements from both families.
Wow. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold intended for the cafeteria bombs to detonate during the busiest lunch period, hoping to kill hundreds of students in the process, after which they would shoot and stab survivors, as well as throw bombs as victims fled the school. The bombs in their cars were intended to detonate after police responded to the scene, so possibly killing more students as well as any police officers, paramedics, firemen, or reporters mingling in the parking lot. These bombs all failed to detonate.
2 backpacks that were filled with pipe bombs, aerosol canisters, small propane bombs were placed in a field near an intersection. That's the green belt that we referred to earlier. And they were intended as a diversion to draw firefighters and emergency personnel away from the school, an effort that basically entirely failed. Only the pipe bombs and one of the aerosol canisters detonated, which caused a small fire, which was quickly put out by the fire department. And a lot of speculation has occurred about the date that was chosen for the attack. The original intended date might have been April 19th. The reason that they are thought to maybe have chosen April 19th is that there's some evidence in their journals to suggest that they were influenced by the Oklahoma City bombing, which took place on April 19th. But there's not much in their notes that indicates a specific date that they had planned. And they'd been stockpiling ammunition, but Harris had to pester Mark Maines for more ammo. And Maines did not deliver the ammo until the evening of April 19th. So if they did intend to do it that day, they may have felt they didn't have enough ammunition yet and put it off a day. But in Harris' journal, on April 19th, he wrote, "We are going to do it tomorrow," which is ambiguous about whether or not the intent was to do it on the 19th and it got put off and they had to delay it for a day, or if there's maybe no date that they had even chosen and they just decided, they're like, let's do it tomorrow. It's unclear from their writings. But in either event, on Tuesday morning, April 20th, 1999, Harris and Klebold placed 2 duffel bags in the cafeteria, which each contained propane bombs intended to detonate during the A lunch period, which began at 11:15 a.m. So if you remember, they bought a propane canister at 9, which means they had less than 2 hours to try and assemble that propane bomb.
Right.
Probably why it failed. Although the rest of them failed too, so who knows?
Yeah. No witnesses remember the duffel bags being added to the backpacks that were already in the cafeteria, and the security cameras did not see the bags being placed in the cafeteria either. But a custodian was changing out the videotapes in the security monitor station at around 11:14 a.m., so like right before that A lunch period, and police have speculated that the bombs were placed during this tape change, though they did also investigate the possibility that the duffel bags were placed during the after prom party, which had been held the weekend before.
Some internet investigators have claimed that Harris and Klebold can be seen on cafeteria surveillance video around 10:58 a.m. planting the bombs in casual school clothing. But when I wrote this article, I took the time to try and spot this in the video, and I was unable to verify the claim. If you have 3 hours and 33 minutes to spare, you can check out the cafeteria surveillance video for yourself in our article. 10:57 a.m. is at about the 23-minute, 20-second mark. Incidentally, the cameras in the cafeteria were the only surveillance cameras to capture events at Columbine. There were no cameras in the library. Some YouTubers have posted footage claiming it's from the Columbine Library, but the footage is actually from a film inspired by Columbine called Zero Day. And the footage in our article is the only genuine Columbine security footage.
The leading theory, based on the notes they left behind, is that Harris and Klebold planned to shoot survivors as they fled into the parking lot. But when the first bombs failed to go off, they moved to the staircase on the hill at the west side.
Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy Neil Gardner was assigned to the high school as a full-time school resource officer. And he usually ate lunch in the cafeteria with students, but the day of the attack, he decided he was going to eat in his patrol car, and he was parked at the northwest corner of the campus, watching students smoke cigarettes and congregate in Clement Park, which is a large meadow type of playground adjacent to the school. They changed clothes, and they returned to the school separately. Harris parked in the junior student parking lot. Klebold parked in the adjoining senior student parking lot. And as Harris walked through the parking lot, he ran into a fellow student, Brooks Brown. They had a long series of petty personal disputes, but they had recently made up. And when they ran across each other in the parking lot, they had kind of a weird encounter. At one time, Harris had relied on Brown for rides to and from school, but Brown was often late, which I guess Harris didn't like and drove him crazy. And finally, they had a very difficult argument the previous winter, and Brown told Harris he would never give him a ride again. And a few days later, at a stop sign by Eric Harris's bus stop, Eric shattered Brooks Brown's windshield by throwing a chunk of ice at the car, and Brown was furious, and he cut off the friendship entirely. And then Harris retaliated by threatening Brown on his webpage, which Brown's parents reported to the police, who let the case fall between the cracks, which is a theme of so many of these crimes that we talk about.
Yep.
Just endless.
According to Brown, who was smoking a cigarette outside during lunch, he was surprised to see Harris pull into the parking lot, as he had noticed that Harris had been absent from a philosophy test in the class that they shared. So Brown made a comment to Harris about missing the test, and Harris replied, "It doesn't matter anymore, Brooks. I like you now. Get out of here. Go home."
Brown felt uneasy, and he had already been planning to skip his next class, so he walked away down South Pierce Street, and he started hearing gunshots a few minutes later. And originally, initially, he thought someone was pulling a prank. That was around 11:19 a.m., which is not just, it was just a few minutes after their encounter. And when he realized what he was hearing, he started running door to door, trying to find a phone that he could use. And he eventually found somebody who was home, and he was able to call the police and tell them about his encounter with somebody's cell phone, which is funny because cell phones were kind of uncommon at the time.
Such a different era, you know, seeing the photo, like the class photo, all the students and stuff, it was just so different.
They're like smoking outside during
Yeah.
lunch. The cops just sitting there watching them.
It really, I don't know, there's something special about that time period when not everyone had a cell phone. Now, like, you know, if this happened, all the students would have their own cell phones. Like,
Very different era.
very, very different. And, you know, you'd think after all of this that, you know, things like this wouldn't fall through the cracks, but even in the most recent school shooting series that we've talked about on our channel and here on Murder Pop magazine, it's just so constant, just the slipping through the cracks. Like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, same thing happened with Nicholas Cruz. He literally went on YouTube, Cruz, and he made a comment that said, I am going to be a school shooter, or something to that effect. And it was reported to the FBI, and the FBI claimed they couldn't figure out who he was. I personally don't think that they tried.
I don't either. That's insane.
Yeah. Anyway, meanwhile, Harris and Klebold armed themselves. They used straps and webbing to conceal their weapons underneath their trench coats. And they were carrying heavy duffel bags with bombs and ammunition in them. Harris had concealed his shotgun in one of the bags. He had a military-style bandolier on under his trench coat. He had a white T-shirt on inscribed with the words "Natural Selection" in black letters, a kind of psychopathic mantra that he had adopted. And Klebold had a black T-shirt on with "Wrath" across it in red letters. And at 11:19, a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Scott and her friend Richard Castaldo were having lunch. They were sitting on the grass next to the west entrance of the school. Klebold threw a pipe bomb towards the parking lot, but it only partially detonated and it just gave off smoke. And Castaldo thought it was a senior prank, and so did several other students. People thought that it was some kind of senior prank. It was towards the end of the year, and that stuff's common. A witness said that they heard someone yell, "Go, go," just before Rachel Scott was killed. She was shot 4 times by Harris. One of the shots hit her in the left temple and killed her. Castaldo was shot 8 times in the chest, in the arm, in the abdomen by Harris and Klebold. He fell to the ground unconscious, and he paralyzed from the chest down.
Dylan Klebold's Tech 9 jammed after the second round, and he was forced to fix it, which he did by ejecting the magazine and stuffing a new magazine into it. Harris took off his trench coat and aimed his carbine down the west staircase, looking in the direction of 3 students. Daniel
Rorbo?
I don't know.
I think it's Rorbo.
Okay. Daniel Rorbo, Sean Graves, and Lance Kirkland. Harris fired off 10 rounds, killing Rorbo. I feel so bad because he's like, I want to make sure I say his name right, so I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it completely right, but...
It's got to be Rohrboughh. It's got to be Rorbo.
Rorbo. So yeah, he killed Daniel Rorbo and badly injured Sean Graves and Lance Kirkland. William David Sanders, a teacher and coach at the school, was in the cafeteria when he recognized the sound of gunshots and began warning students to run and hide.
Around the same time, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office was notified of an explosion. That was around 11:21 a.m. That was after the diversionary bomb had partially detonated on the Greenbelt. They found 2 backpacks containing multiple explosive devices, but as we mentioned, only a couple of them partially detonated, and they failed to trigger the others. While that was happening, Harris was firing 7 shots at students who were sitting on the hillside adjacent to the steps that he was standing on, opposite the west entrance of the school. A student named Michael Johnson was hit in the face, leg, and arm, but he was able to run away and he escaped. A student named Mark Taylor was shot in the chest, arms, and leg and fell to the ground where he played dead. And the other 3 students managed to escape totally uninjured.
Dylan Klebold walked down the steps towards the cafeteria, taking a shot at the body of Dan Rorbo, who, with his shotgun, who was, already dead. And then came upon Lance Kirkland, who was wounded and lying on the ground, calling out for help. And Dylan said, "Sure, I'll help you." Then he shot Kirkland in the jaw with his shotgun. Amazingly, Kirkland survived and says he feels fine now, which is incredible. And he credits psychological treatment for helping him deal with the emotional toll of the shooting.
Graves, Michael Graves, was paralyzed from the waist down, but he managed to crawl into the doorway of the cafeteria where he collapsed, and he took his own blood and rubbed it all over his face to play dead. After shooting Kirkland, Klebold stepped over Graves to enter the cafeteria, and Graves said that he remembers Klebold saying, "Sorry, dude." And Klebold entered the cafeteria, but only briefly, to check on the propane bombs. And Harris stayed at the top of the stairs, still shooting. And during this time, he partially paralyzed a 17-year-old girl named Anne Marie Hochhalter as she tried to flee.
Dylan Klebold then went back up the stairs to join Eric Harris. They each shot once at students standing close to a soccer field, but did not hit anyone. They walked toward the west entrance, throwing pipe bombs in several directions, including onto the roof. Only a few of these pipe bombs detonated.
They were really not good bomb makers.
No, they were not, luckily. Witnesses heard one of them say, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." Meanwhile, art teacher Patty Nielsen was still deep inside the school. She had heard the commotion and walked towards the west entrance of the school with student Brian Anderson, thinking students were filming a video or pulling a prank. And as Brian Anderson opened the first set of double doors, Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris opened fire, shooting out the windows and injuring Anderson with flying glass, and Nielsen with shrapnel. Both Anderson and Nielsen ran back down the hall into the library, where Nielsen told the students to get under the desks and be silent.
Nielsen herself hid under the library's administrative counter. Anderson fell to the floor bleeding, and he crawled into the magazine room to hide. The magazine room was basically a large closet that was adjacent to the library. And at 11:22 a.m., a custodian called Deputy Neil Gardner, who was the assigned resource officer, on the school radio, requesting assistance in the senior parking lot. The only paved route took him around the school to the east and south on Pierce Street, where at 11:23 a.m., he heard on his police radio that a female was down. He thought she'd been hit by a car until he was getting out of his patrol car in the senior lot at about 11:24, when he heard another call over the radio that there was a shooter in the school. And at the same time, from the west entrance, Harris turned and fired 10 shots towards Deputy Gardner, who was about 60 yards away on the other side of his police cruiser. And they exchanged fire. Harris stopped to reload, and Gardner taking cover behind his car, and fired 4 rounds off of the service pistol. Harris went back behind the building, and Gardner briefly believed that he had hit Harris, but Harris reemerged from cover, fired several more rounds at Gardner, and then retreated into the building.
In a pattern that would repeat multiple times that day. No one at all was hit during this exchange of gunfire between the shooters and the police. Gardner called over the police radio, "Shots fired in the building. I need someone in the south lot with me." Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold entered the school's main north hallway near the west entrance. They were throwing pipe bombs, Sorry for kind of laughing there. I think these two are idiots.
They are.
They were throwing pipe bombs and shooting at anyone that they saw. Klebold shot Stephanie Munson in the ankle, but she was still able to escape the school to safety. And after proceeding up and down the hall several times, shooting at any students that they saw, they shot out the windows to the east entrance of the school. Then they went towards the west entrance, turning into the library hallway.
So at about 11:23 a.m., and I included these times to give you guys an idea of how quickly this progressed. I mean, we're not even 10 minutes into this thing. Like,
very quick.
Very quick. A lot has happened already, and
yeah,
less than 10 minutes.
Tape change happened at 11:14. That first lunch break is 11:15, and now it's 11:23. So
the first gunshots were at 11:19, and now we're at 11:24, and I mean, just havoc has broken loose in this school. But yeah, I included all the times just to give you guys an idea of how quickly this all unfolded, because even compared to school shootings tend to be over relatively quickly, but yeah, just very fast. So where the hell were we? Okay, 11:24.
So this all happened very, very quickly.
And they trade shots. Okay. So now Gardner calls over the radio. He says, "Shots fired. I need someone in the south lot with me." They were shooting at students, and two more deputies arrive. Deputy Paul Smoker and Paul Magor. I think that's how you pronounce that.
I think you're right.
Might be Mager. But they were motorcycle patrolmen, and they were writing traffic tickets north of the school when they got the female down call. And they drove their motorcycles over the grass between the athletic fields, and they headed towards the west entrance of the school. And they were joined by deputies Scott Taborski, Rick Searle, and Kevin Walker in their patrol cars. And the first two officers abandoned their motorcycles for the safety of the cars that their fellow deputies were driving. And they started rescue efforts immediately with two wounded students near the ball fields. And Harris came back to the double doors at around 11:26 and took some shots at Deputy Gardner, who again returned fire, and again no one was hit. And Deputy Smoker also fired off 3 rounds from his service pistol at Harris, who again retreated into the building for cover. And again, nobody was hit in the exchange. And at the same time, inside the school cafeteria, Dave Sanders and custodians John Curtis and Jay Galatine, they initially told students to get under tables, but they were very smart, and as the situation continued to unfold, they evacuated students up the staircase that led from the cafeteria to the second floor of the school. And then Sanders headed up behind them, trying to secure as much of the school as he could. And those stairs terminated around the corner from the library hallway that was in the main south hall.
Sanders was with a student at the end of the library hallway, where he was gesturing for students in the library to stay where they were. When they noticed Harris and Klebold approaching from the corner of the north hallway, both Sanders and the students turned and ran in the opposite direction. Harris and Klebold opened fire down the hallway. They hit Sanders twice in the back and neck, with a bullet hitting his teeth on exit.
That's horrifying.
For real. I can't even imagine the sensation. Oh my God. They missed the student who ran into a science class frantically warning everyone inside. Dylan Klebold walked over towards Sanders, who had collapsed on the ground. He tossed a pipe bomb, then returned to Eric Harris up the library hallway.
Sanders struggled to crawl toward the science classroom area, where a fellow teacher was able to drag him into a classroom where as many as 30 students were sheltering. And despite the chaos and the horror that was unfolding around them, teachers managed to bring student Aaron Hansey into the class from another classroom to help Sanders because I guess he had some kind of first aid experience. And with assistance from a fellow student named Kevin Starkey and a teacher named Teresa Miller, Hansey gave Sanders first aid for 3 hours straight. He used shirts that he collected from other students in the room as bandages. He used pictures that Sanders had in his wallet to keep him awake. And Miller and the students used the classroom phone to maintain contact with the police outside the school. As we were saying earlier, just a totally different era. Everybody would have a cell phone now.
Yeah, the idea, I know some people are sentimental and carry, pictures of their loved ones in their wallet maybe, but, everyone's got their...
All on their phone.
Yeah, and, like, you and Hunter are my phone screen, I don't carry pictures around, like, it's just, I don't know.
Patty Nielsen called 911 after taking cover under the library admin desk. According to emergency transcripts, her call was received at 11:25 and 18 seconds. And a couple minutes later at 11:29, Harris and Klebold entered the library for the first time. There were 52 students, 2 teachers, and 2 librarians sheltered in place inside. It's not any kind of judgment on them. Not only is it not a judgment on them, but to a large degree, it's still what they teach kids now, that they should shelter and hide. And my advice is that if there's a shooting, you should take cover. Don't put yourself in direct line of fire, but at your first opportunity, you should flee.
Get out of the building. Away. Out of the building. Run.
Out of a window if you have to. Yeah. Just get as far away as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Staying in place is...
Bad decision.
It's really unfortunate. And again, that is what people are taught because it's like, well, we don't actually know the full situation. So we just need to make sure that there's shelter and, people could be waiting outside. You don't want to get caught in an open field. Like, there's all this stuff. And I'm like, I don't know. School shooting protocol after all this freaking time should be to get the hell out.
So when they entered the library, Harris yelled, "Get up," loudly enough to be heard on the 911 call. And when no one got up, Harris yelled, "Fine, I'll start shooting anyway," which kind of suggests that getting up would have been a bad idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. They went deeper into the library towards some rows of computers, and at the north row was disabled student Kyle Velasquez, who Klebold shot with a shotgun, hitting him in the back and the head. They put their duffel bags down at the southern row of computers, pausing to reload, and then they walked between the rows of computers towards the windows. Harris fired a shotgun twice at a desk. Student Evan Todd had been standing near a pillar when they entered the library, and he had just taken cover behind a photocopier. And when Harris shot at the desk, Todd was hit by wooden splinters. He got one in the eye, and he got some in his lower back, but he was not seriously injured by the wooden splinters.
During their massacre in the library, Klebold and Harris made comments about how long they had been waiting for this, shouting celebratory things like, "Woo!" and, after shooting people, while ordering the jocks to stand up. One of them, anybody with a white hat or a sports emblem on it is dead. So...
Wearing a white baseball hat at Columbine was a tradition among sports team members.
At the windows, they fired through them in the direction of the recently arrived police, who returned fire. No one was hit in the exchange. I thought this was a kind of a dumb decision, because then you're just opening up the windows for police to be able to see in clearer, in my opinion. But, you know, they were both teenagers who were clearly unstable, so I think violence was just the name of the game. But where was I? Oh, no one was hit in the exchange. Klebold took off his trench coat at that time and then fired his shotgun at a nearby table, injuring 3 students: Patrick Ireland, Daniel Stapleton, and Mackay Hall.
Harris walked towards the southern row of computer desks with his shotgun, got down on one knee, and fired under the first desk, hitting 14-year-old Stephen Kernow in the neck. Then he moved to an adjacent computer desk where he injured 17-year-old Casey Rugseger. Again, our apologies if we got any of these names wrong. We don't want to be disrespectful to victims in any regard. But I think that it looks like Rugseger.
Yeah.
She was shot, and the shot passed completely through her right shoulder, grazed her neck, and severed a major artery. And when she gasped in pain, Harris reportedly told her, "Quit your bitching."
He then walked to a table south of the southern row of computers with 2 students sheltered underneath: Casey Bernal and Emily Wyatt. Wyant,
I think.
And he slapped the surface of the table twice as he knelt and said "peekaboo" before shooting Bernal once in the head with a shotgun, killing her instantly.
Harris was holding the shotgun with one hand, and when it recoiled, it hit him in the face, and he injured his nose. And he told Klebold, and Klebold responded, "Why'd you do that?" Which is a pretty good question, honestly, because it's a pretty stupid decision.
It is.
A lot of stupid decisions they made this day.
Yep.
After shooting Bernal, Harris turned towards the next table, where a Brie Pasquale, not sure,
Pasquale, I think,
was sitting on the floor next to the table instead of hiding beneath it. Harris's nose was bleeding from being... Again, sorry to laugh. Well, I don't want to be disrespectful to the victims. Also, nobody can hear you because you just got up and walked across the room, and now you're in the kitchen. So I said sorry for laughing, and she said I'm not, if you didn't hear that, because she was not near her microphone, but still speaking as if she was.
I'm back. I really needed water. And I'm not. You're laughing at Eric Harris for,
I am.
getting himself in the face.
I still want to apologize for laughing. I don't want to come across as being disrespectful to the victims at all. But it is funny that you were. It is funny that Eric Harris punched himself in the face with a shotgun.
I mean, honestly, fuck him.
Yeah, he deserved it. As I don't remember who I made this joke about, but I made a joke about somebody, one of the school shooters, that then he shot himself, which he should have done first. And that's how I feel about these 2 clowns as well.
Same. and I don't really care if it's an unpopular opinion.
So Harris asked Bree if she wanted to die, and she begged for her life. He laughed and responded, "Everyone's gonna die." But when Klebold said shoot her, Harris responded, "No, we're gonna blow up the school anyway." There were a bunch of people that they chose not to kill for whatever reason. Starting with Brown.
Yeah.
He was the first,
I
but
mean,
there were a couple.
and we're gonna blow up the school anyway, based on their track record with that, seemed, highly unlikely. I don't even know if, he was clearly delusional. He must have believed it himself, but maybe there was something about the girl. I don't know.
As I said, like a lot of this was motivated by their perception of their own romantic failures, because apparently that's super important in high school. I don't know. I understand that kids are motivated by all of that. I certainly was as a kid, but have some fucking perspective, man.
Yeah.
A long life. I had a long life to be rejected. Don't take it too personally, too early. So, Klebold noticed a kid named Ireland trying to provide aid to Hall, and as Ireland tried to help, his head cleared the top of the table, and Klebold shot him for a second time, and he fired off multiple shots. He hit him twice in the head and once in the foot, and he was knocked unconscious, but amazingly he survived.
That's what I'm saying. We were talking about serial killers and traumatic brain injuries in our last Murder Talk Radio, the one we just recorded.
On the psychopathology of the criminal mind.
Yeah, sorry, I'm mentioning it, and then I'm wait a second, that's a different one. But you can get shot in the head and survive it. And then there are serial killers who they fell out of a tree as a kid, or Gary Hilton had a Murphy bed scalp him, and you know what I mean? Those head injuries have been connected to their psychopathology and their behavioral problems.
Sure. So Klebold then walked to another table where he found 18-year-old Isaiah Scholes, 16-year-old Matthew Kechter.
Yeah.
And 16-year-old Craig Scott, who was Rachel Scott's younger brother. And Klebold made a racial epithet and tried to pull Scholes out from under the table. Harris left Pasquale.
I really want to mention that. I'm not going to say the N-word, but he, this is the kind of person he was. He pulls Scholes out from under the table, and he said, "Found a N-word." I don't like to graze over that stuff because it speaks volumes about the perpetrators and their hatred, and I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely. Obviously, I'm not going to say it either, but that's why I included it in the article.
Yeah. Unnecessary to say out loud, but
absolutely.
I think it's important to racial epithet versus, he
Sure.
called this guy the N-word while he pulled him out from under a table.
To shoot him.
Yeah, it's not good.
They taunted him after they pulled him out, and they made more derogatory racial remarks, and then they both shot him and killed him. And Klebold also shot Kechter and killed him.
Scholes was not shot in the head, but Klebold remarked, "I didn't know black brains could fly that far." And
what a moron.
Yeah, he's just stupid. Scott was uninjured, lying in the blood of his friends, pretending that he was dead, and Harris yelled, "Who's ready to die next?" He turned and threw a cricket at the table where Hall, Steepleton, and Ireland had been sitting, which landed on Steepleton's thigh. Hall picked it up and tossed it behind them, and it exploded mid-air.
So after that, Harris walked towards some of the bookcases, and he jumped on one and shook it in an apparent attempt to knock it over, which didn't work. And then he shot at the books that fell off of it. I guess, in ineffectual anger that he was unable to topple the bookshelf. I don't know. So then Klebold walked to the east side of the library. Harris walked to meet Klebold. They shot at his display case. They shot towards a table, and they hit a 17-year-old named Mark Kintgen, Kintgen, Kintgen is how I'm assuming that that's pronounced. And they hit him in the head and shoulder, injuring him. He then turned towards the table to his left and fired, injuring multiple 18-year-olds, Lisa Kreutz, Lauren Townsend, and Valine Schnurr, with the same shotgun blast. And Klebold walked towards the same table and fired several shots with his Tech 9, killing Townsend. Valine Schnurr was seriously injured, and she began screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God." Klebold asked Schnurr if she believed in God, and she said she did. And Klebold said, "Why?" And then, "God is gay." And then he reloaded his gun and walked away from the table.
God, these two. These two just
I know.
unhinged fools. Like, what?
It's all a lot of... If they were born in just a decade later, I probably would have been on the internet having troll interactions with them where I was calling them tryhards, because there is just a lot of tryharding in this story.
Yeah. I'm not a religious person, but God is gay. Like, come on, dude.
Okay.
Like,
Shut up.
for real. Oh, God.
So this is kind of interesting. Townsend was by far the victim who was shot the most times. And this, along with his journal, has led some people to speculate that much of Dylan Klebold's rage was from feelings of sexual inadequacy. And others have speculated that Townsend may have been a secret crush that he wrote about in his diary, and who may have even rejected him. The pseudonym Harriet was used in Dave Cullen's Columbine to refer to the female Columbine student mentioned in Klebold's journal entries, with whom he was obsessively in love. And because she was shot far more than any other victims, there's been a lot of speculation that she was the person that he was obsessively in love with. Obsessively. We're both super exhausted. We are moving stuff all day. And now it's like 2:30 in the morning, and we're just trying to power through these.
Got a funny way of showing it.
The obsessive love.
Yeah. If, I guess, it's that thing of, like, if I can't have her, no one can.
I don't even think it's that. I think it's just rage. He's just a narcissist.
Yeah, just like pure hatred, anger.
The FBI said that he was paranoid depressive, but I see a lot of elements of narcissism in this.
Just the
shooting itself has high elements of narcissism.
And the entitlement.
Yeah.
Resentment, entitlement, anger.
So after that, Harris approached another table where two girls were hiding. He bent down to look at them, dismissed them as pathetic, and then moved on to another table where he fired twice, injuring 16-year-olds Nicole Nolan and John Tomlin. Tomlin then moved out from under the table, and Klebold shot him repeatedly, killing him. Harris walked back to the other side of the table where Townsend had been killed, and behind the table was 16-year-old Kelly Fleming, who was shot by Harris with his shotgun in the back, which killed her. He also shot at the table behind Fleming, where he wounded 18-year-old Gianna Park, before he and Klebold moved to the center of the library, where they reloaded their weapons at a table.
Eric Harris then pointed his carbine under the table, but the student he was aiming at moved out of the way, and he told him to identify himself. The student was John Savage, an acquaintance of Klebold's, and he asked Klebold what they were doing, to which he shrugged and answered, "Oh, just killing people." Savage asked if they were going to kill him, and due to the noise, Klebold didn't hear him and said, "What?" And Savage asked again whether they were going to kill him, and Klebold said no, and told him to run, which he did, escaping through the library's main entrance and out through the cafeteria.
As he was leaving the library, Harris fired his carbine at the table just north of where he had been. And he hit 15-year-old Daniel Mauser in the ear and the hand. Mauser retaliated. He either shoved a chair at Harris or he might have grabbed his leg. The details are fuzzy on that point, but he retaliated in some way, and Harris fired again, hitting Mauser in the face at point-blank range, killing him. But if you're going to retaliate against someone with a gun, your retaliation needs to be thorough and decisive.
Yeah, I don't want to hate on him for it, but
not at all. I mean, he's just some kid, you know?
I think you have to close the distance really quickly to the point where they have to have enough space to shoot at you. So if you can close that space, and you're not going to be in the line of the gun. Easier said than done,
Absolutely. But again, if you're in a situation like that and you make the decision that you're going to retaliate.
Yeah.
And to be honest, you're already being shot at. Not a bad decision. It's like the ones, if you just lay there, you're probably just going to get shot. And the only chance you have is to retaliate. But Harris then moved south. He fired 3 shots under a table. He injured 17-year-olds Jennifer Doyle and Austin Eubank. Klebold shot and fatally wounded 17-year-old Corey DePuter. And after those shootings, they were at 11:35 a.m., there were no further victims. Klebold was quoted as saying that they might start knifing people, but they never did. So this was essentially the end of their massacre, but it wasn't really the end because a lot more time unfolded.
So yeah, they started around, it was 11:20 something?
It was 11:14, I think. I think the first shots were at 11:19.
It's a
20,
lot.
20 minutes.
A lot that happened real quick.
About 20 minutes.
Then they headed towards the library's administrative counter, and Harris threw a Molotov cocktail toward the other end of the library. Like so many of the bombs they made, it failed to explode.
Seems like almost all of them failed to explode. In fact, that one cricket is the only one we've heard about that did not fail to explode.
Yeah, the other ones were most just described as partially
It was like smoke.
detonated. Yeah.
The ones that started a fire on the green belt.
I love that the one that detonated didn't hurt anybody.
Me too.
But, yeah. The kid
Quick
just grabbed it.
thinking on that kid's part.
Absolutely.
I hope he's proud of that to this day.
He should be.
He absolutely
I would
should
be. That was great.
I'm a crumbly canyon wall. Sorry, it's a little reference from one of our favorite movies, The Emperor's New Groove.
Dylan Klebold pulled the chair out from the desk, and then pointed his Tech 9 at Evan Todd, who was hiding underneath it, wearing a white hat. Klebold asked if he was a jock, and Todd said no. Klebold responded, "Well, that's good. We don't like jocks." Klebold then demanded to see his face, and Todd partly lifted his hat so that his face would remain obscured. And Klebold asked Todd to give him a reason why he shouldn't kill him, and Todd said, "I don't want trouble." And Klebold responded, "Trouble? You don't even know what trouble is." They're like a B-movie script. They're so cringy. Ugh. Anyway, so Todd corrected himself, saying, "That's not what I meant. I mean, I don't have a problem with you guys. I never will. I never did." And Klebold then told Harris he was he was going to let Todd live, but that Harris could kill him if he wanted to. And Harris responded that he and Klebold should head to the cafeteria. While Harris was walking out, Klebold fired into an open library staff break room, hitting a small television, and said, "One more thing," then picked up a chair beside the library counter under which Patty Nielsen was still hiding and slammed the chair down on the computer terminal that sat atop the library counter.
So Klebold joined Harris at the library entrance. They walked out of the library together around 11:36. Survivors cautiously began evacuating the library through the north emergency exit door. Casey Rugseger was evacuated by Craig Scott and likely would have bled to death if she hadn't been. Patrick Ireland, still unconscious, and Lisa Kreutz, conscious but unable to move, remained in the library along with Patty Nielsen, who crawled into the break room which Klebold earlier fired shots into and hid in a small cupboard. And after leaving the library, they entered the science area, where they caused a fire in an empty storage closet that was extinguished by a teacher who was hidden in an adjacent room. That's so funny. I was just imagining a sort of, they set a fire, this teacher is hiding, he puts it out, they come back by, they're like, I was just imagining this cartoon scenario where they keep setting this fire and this teacher just keeps putting it out. But lost where I was. So then at 11:44, they appear on a school security camera, re-entering the cafeteria. And Harris crouches against a rail on the staircase, fires towards the propane bombs that were left in the cafeteria that never went off, in another unsuccessful attempt to get them to detonate.
Klebold approached the propane bombs, examining it as Harris was drinking from one of the cups left behind by a student in the chaos. And Klebold lit a Molotov cocktail and threw it at the propane bomb, igniting the gallon or so of gasoline attached to the bomb, causing a fire intense enough that it melted chairs in the cafeteria before it was extinguished by the fire sprinklers a few minutes later. And then they left the cafeteria at 11:46.
I just wanted to say that there's a picture of the chairs in the article that this is based on, and it looks like it was a relatively intense fire. That chair is just
totally melted. It looks like a piece of fabric draped over what could be a chair.
It does.
It's, yeah.
So back in the main hallway, they took shots into the walls and the ceilings. Students and teachers continue to hide. At 11:56, they returned to the cafeteria. They briefly entered the school kitchen. Then they went back to the staircase, into the library, which was now empty of survivors except for Patrick Ireland, who was coming in and out of consciousness, badly wounded, and student Lisa Kreutz, who was unable to move after being repeatedly shot. It's believed that they returned to the library to watch their car bombs detonate, which was supposed to happen at noon and didn't happen. And at 12:02, they went to the west windows and they opened fire on police outside. Police shot back. No one was injured in the exchange again. By 12:05, all gunfire had stopped. Klebold and Harris walked to the bookshelves near where Patrick Ireland was badly wounded. Harris sat down with his back to a bookshelf and fired his shotgun through the roof of his mouth, which, as I said earlier, he should have done first. And just before shooting himself, he lit a Molotov cocktail on a nearby table, the one underneath, that Ireland was underneath, and he caused the tabletop to catch fire. Klebold knelt down and shot himself in the left temple with his Tech 9. And so by 12:08, less than an hour after it started, both of them were dead by their own hands. An article by the Rocky Mountain News stated that Patty Nielsen overheard them shout 1, 2, 3 in unison just before a loud boom, but Nielsen later said she had never spoken with either of the authors of that article. So, yeah.
Oh, it's so sketchy.
A total of 329 rounds of ammunition were fired. Harris fired his carbine rifle 96 times, nearly twice as much as Klebold. 47 shots outside, 36 shots inside, 13 in the library. He discharged his shotgun 25 times, 21 times in the library, and 4 times inside the school. Klebold fired his Tech 9 55 times, 3 outside, 31 shots inside, 21 shots in the library. Klebold also fired 12 rounds from his double-barreled shotgun, twice outside, 4 times inside, 6 times in the library. And law enforcement officers fired 141 rounds.
Harris was responsible for 8 of the 13 confirmed deaths. Rachel Scott, Daniel Rorbo, teacher Dave Sanders, Steve Cornell, Cassie Bernal, Isaiah Scholes, Kelly Fleming, and Daniel Mauser. Klebold was responsible for the remaining 5 victims: Kyle Velasquez, Matthew Ketchter, Lauren Townsend, John Tomlin, and Corey DePuter. There were also 24 total injured. There were also 24 total injured, most of whom were in critical condition.
In 2002, the National Enquirer published photos of Harris and Klebold dead on the floor of the library. Klebold's gun is underneath his body, and it's difficult to see in the photo, which led to speculation that Harris shot Klebold before killing himself. But some of Klebold's blood was on Harris's legs, and also a piece of Harris's brain matter was underneath the material burned on the table by Klebold's Molotov cocktail, which suggests that Harris had already shot himself when Klebold lit the table on fire. 2 SWAT teams entered the school at 1:09, moving from classroom to classroom, discovering hidden pockets of students and faculty as they went. At 2:15 p.m., the students that were caring for teacher Dave Sanders put a sign up in the window that on like a whiteboard, and they wrote "1 bleeding to death" to alert emergency personnel of Sanders' situation in the science room. Police initially were afraid that it was a ruse by the shooters. At 2:30 p.m., a shirt that was tied to the doorknob convinced them that it wasn't, and by 2:40 p.m., SWAT had evacuated the room and called for paramedics.
Patrick Ireland regained and lost consciousness several times after being shot by Klebold. He was paralyzed on his right side. He somehow crawled to the library windows where, on live television at 2:38 p.m., he stretched out the window, intending to fall into the arms of 2 SWAT team members standing on the roof of an emergency vehicle.
This made me so angry. Instead, they allowed him to fall directly onto the vehicle's roof in a pool of his own blood. Don Kramer and John Ramoniak were the SWAT team members, and they were later criticized for allowing Ireland to drop more than 7 feet to the hard metal roof of the vehicle while doing little to ensure that he could do so safely. He later became known as the boy in the window.
By 3 p.m., SWAT officers had moved Sanders to a storage room, which was more easily accessible. A paramedic arrived and found Sanders had no pulse. He was the only teacher to die in the shooting.
Yet another police failure. Why? Just get them out of the school. There's a thing that police do where they're like, obviously you want to go home. Everybody wants to be safe. The police are literally paid to put themselves in danger. And I find it infuriating when they do things like this. Like, go find another job. If you're not willing to take the risk to save a civilian, it's your job. Go, I don't know, be a garbage man. They don't get shot at. You'll
This
never have...
teacher put himself in harm's way and got shot at.
He
and
did.
Killed. He was
And-
literally trying to run away with a student. And, like, I just... Like, you're a police officer. Come on.
Take the risk. That's what you're paid for.
Yep.
Lisa Kreutz, who was shot in the shoulder, arms, hand, and thigh, was still in the library. She tried to move, but she was lightheaded from the loss of blood. She kept herself occupied by keeping track of time using the sound of the school's bells until police arrived. She was finally evacuated at 3:22 p.m., along with Patty Nielsen, Brian Anderson, and 3 library staff members who had hidden themselves in rooms adjacent to the library. And there's a picture. You can see Lisa Kreutz graduating, receiving her diploma in a wheelchair with one of her arms still in a sling from the shooting. By 4 p.m., Sheriff John P. Stone said that police officers were searching the bodies of the gunmen cautiously, fearing they had used bombs to booby-trap corpses, including their own. Of course, if that was true, they could have relied on the fact that they wouldn't have gone off.
At 4:30 p.m., the school was declared safe by police. At 5:30 p.m., more explosives were found in the parking lot and on the roof. Additional officers were called in. And at 6:15, over an hour and a half after the school was declared safe, police found a bomb in Klebold's car in the parking lot. Sheriff Stone then marked the entire school as a crime scene, and the bomb squad disarmed the car bomb. Klebold's car was repaired and in 2006 put up for auction.
Families of students and staff were asked to gather at nearby Leawood Elementary School. Some of the victims' families were told to wait on a final school bus that never came, and some found out their children were dead from the news.
Disgusting.
At 10:40 p.m., a member of the bomb squad who was attempting to dispose of an undetonated pipe bomb accidentally set one off by brushing it against the wall of the ordnance disposal trailer, causing the bomb to detonate inside of the trailer, but no one was injured. They were really bad at making bombs.
They were.
He was holding this bomb and he brushed it up against the thing and set it off, and he still wasn't injured.
Man.
By the way, I just again have to comment on the police incompetence. The school is safe, then they find more bombs. One of the police members brushes a bomb up against a wall.
I'm like, he declared it a crime scene at 6 p.m., which was over an hour after he initially declared that it was safe. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you declared it a crime scene the second you step foot in it.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah.
And of course the whole school is the crime scene. Who is making these decisions?
Even when
I
people
mean, I
are like,
know
well,
who,
there aren't a lot of blah, blah, blah. It was kind of one of the big first ones. I don't care. There's like protocol of dealing, whether it's a massive school shooting or one kid gets killed off campus, unrelated. Like, there are ways that you handle talking to the parents of victims, how you handle talking to family members. And I just didn't see this happening. I cannot imagine finding out from the news or being sent to one location and being told to wait for a bus and they just forget about you.
Yeah, and it just never comes. But I have to say that you made a comment just a second ago that it was, and it is a commonly held belief that this was one of the first school shootings. But as you can all see in my a history of school shootings in the United States, that's a myth.
It is.
And there have been school shootings in America literally since before it was the United States.
That is a huge myth. Absolutely. People think that it has to do with modern firearms, and I'm like, you are out of your mind.
They are out of their minds. So the total count was 12 dead, 14 if you include the shooters, 12 students dead, 14 if you include the shooters, and one teacher, Sanders. And an additional 20 students and one teacher were injured as a result of the shooting. 3 more victims were injured indirectly as they tried to escape. Makeshift memorials were created after the massacre, including one employing Rachel Scott's car and John Tomlin's truck. On April 30th, a carpenter named Greg, I think Zanus,
Yeah.
he erected 15 6-foot-tall wooden crosses. Sorry to laugh. I love this detail. There was controversy over whether Harrison Klebold should be memorialized, and he included 2 crosses for Harrison Klebold on a hilltop near Columbine High School in Clement Park across the street.
Why?
The father of Daniel Rorbo argued that murderers should not be memorialized in the same place as victims, and Rorbo's father cut them down.
Good for him. What the hell?
Sorry, that's why I was laughing.
Waste of wood.
I'm glad he did it.
What the hell are you thinking? Ugh.
So this is another just tragic detail about this event. 6 months after her daughter was paralyzed from the waist down, Anne Marie Hochhalter's mother, Carla Hochhalter, killed herself. She walked into a pawn shop. She asked to see a .38 caliber revolver. She loaded it secretly with ammunition that she brought into the store with her, and she shot herself in the head.
God, I remember hearing about this. I'm like, what a selfish woman.
She left a note behind apologizing to her family. She was survived by her husband, Ted, and her 2 children, Anne Marie and her brother, Nathan, who was also a Columbine student.
I'm sorry.
Several former students and teachers had PTSD. Greg Barnes, the 17-year-old student who witnessed Sanders being shot, also committed suicide in May of 2000.
Sad.
Survivor Austin Eubanks, who was injured in the shooting, became heavily medicated and developed an opioid addiction. He died of an accidental overdose in 2019 at the age of 37.
Wow.
Sue Klebold, mother of Dylan, was initially in denial about his involvement and believed that he was tricked by Harris. But 6 months later, she saw the tapes that they made, and she acknowledged that he was equally responsible for the killings. And you can see some of these. We secured these videos, and they are in this article. You can go watch them if you'd like. Klebold's mother wrote about Columbine publicly for the first time in an essay that appeared in the October 2009 issue of O, the Oprah magazine. And she wrote, "For the rest of my life, I will be haunted by the horror and anguish Dylan caused. And also that Dylan changed everything I believed about myself, about God, about family, and about love." She said she had no advance clues of her son's intentions, but that, quote, "Once I saw his journals, it was clear to me that Dylan entered the school with the intention of dying there."
That's so sad. It's sad, but I also have to wonder, like, how did you not see anything? This guy couldn't make a pipe bomb to save his freaking life. And, like, he was saying the most cringy shit. I'm sorry. there had to be flags. Like the
Oh, just wait. Just wait until we hit the second part of the second article.
Well, it's been a minute and I am somewhat familiar with this, and I remember there being lots of signs and like lots of debate about the parents. So when I'm saying like how did you not know, it's a bit more rhetorical. I didn't know about the victim who died of an overdose. Just imagine what their life would have been like without
That was just 5 years ago.
Yeah. Sad. But just massively impacting everybody. But in Andrew Solomon's 2012 book, Far from the Tree, she acknowledged that on the day of the massacre, when she discovered that Klebold was one of the shooters, she prayed he would kill himself, saying that she had a sudden vision of what he might be doing. And so while every other mother in Littleton was praying that her child was safe, I had to pray that mine would die before he hurt anyone else.
Being open about it, I think she deserves some kudos for that.
I think it makes... The thing is, you're right. She's not wrong. We literally both made multiple comments about that while recording this. First. Yeah, you should have. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I just find it bizarre.
All right, you ready to move into the second? You want to power through? Or do you want to go to bed?
I gotta see how long it is.
Oh, it's long.
Okay, no, I can't. Or, I don't know. Do you want to?
I want to try, yeah.
All right, fuck it.
All right. So, the Columbine High School Massacre, often referred to by the mononym Columbine, as you know, because we literally just told you, took place on April 20th, 1999 at Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. The moral panic and media feeding frenzy that followed in the wake of the massacre made Columbine the most infamous mass shooting ever perpetrated. And Columbine had an influence on subsequent shooting events in schools. Since Columbine, there have been close to 100 of these copycat attacks, at least 20 of which resulted in actual attacks that were not thwarted by law enforcement.
In many of those attacks, perpetrators referenced Harris and Klebold, often as heroes or martyrs, mirroring what would happen in the Elliot Roger Islavista case some 15 years later.
Just quickly, not to make light, but every time I read Isla Vista, I think of Del Boca Vista. Every time. Anyway.
Roger and Harris had a lot in common. Quote, "I just want to be surrounded by the flesh of a woman," starts one of Eric Harris's journal entries, dated 5 months before the Columbine shooting. Adam Lanza, responsible for the Sandy Hook shooting, was reportedly obsessed with the Columbine shooting.
Killing yourself seems like a bad way to be surrounded by the flesh of a woman.
I guess that depends if you're Muslim or not. That was a weird joke.
So Harris and Klebold have become what the Napa Valley Register called cultural icons for troubled, disaffected youth. And Ralph Larkin, who's the sociologist who wrote Comprehending Columbine, found that subsequent shooters, quote, referred directly to Columbine as their inspiration. Others attempted to supersede the Columbine shootings in body count. And he also wrote that Columbine established a script for school shootings. What we call a school shooting was, in actuality, explicitly planned as a terrorist attack. And this is something that so many of these so-called experts have gotten wrong about Columbine. This was a terrorist attack. Harris directly references the Oklahoma City bombing in his journal, a desire to outdo the Oklahoma City bombing and cause, quote, the most deaths in U.S. history, end quote. Both Harris and Klebold wanted power, even if it had to be in death. even if it had to come in the form of a legacy of infamous villainy and what they perceived as the power of a legacy of infamy. The founding father of media theory, Marshall McLuhan, said, quote, "Violence is the quest for identity. When identity disappears with technological innovation, violence is the natural recourse."
As we will explore, Klebold and Harris had little in the way of constructive identities. And what they did have was robbed from them by the abuse of their peers and the neglect of their parents, both largely consequences of technological developments and demographic changes that took place during the 20th century. And I do not mean to overstate the role of the parents. Catherine Harris was a volunteer soccer coach for Eric. Sue Klebold was a volunteer at Dylan's school. Sue also overlooked Dylan's social issues, and Wayne Harris was reportedly mystified by his son, but has accepted that Eric was a psychopath. Both Wayne and Kathy Harris felt like he fooled them.
He also fooled professional therapists. Wayne and Kathy Harris reportedly felt misled by the psychologist they sent Eric to. He had brushed off Eric's trademark trench coat as only a coat, which I have to say seems like not something misleading, because a coat is, in fact, only a coat. But he gave them the impression that he saw Eric's problems as routine teenage stuff. Eric rarely seemed angry, except for an incident where he slammed his fist into a brick wall, scraping his knuckles. They knew Eric had a website, but they never went online to look at it.
How do you... I'd at least be looking.
It's weird.
I'd be like, oh, my kid has a website. Huh, I wonder what they're putting on it.
Larkin does note that mass shootings are a form of terrorism in the chapter of the Wiley Handbook on Violence in Education titled Learning to be a Mass Shooter, which is a case study on Elliot Rodger. Would you like to do the honors of reading this excerpt?
Yes. Mass shooters often engage the media through the publication of manifestos, videos, and pictures. Because mass shootings take place in public venues, they undermine the public sphere by creating the perception that participation in social events and activities in public spaces is unsafe and unpredictable. Almost all victims of rampage shootings are innocent and happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Rampage shootings have generated heated debates on numerous volatile social issues, including gun rights and control, media violence, school security, mental health care, parenting, police profiling, and racism.
Larkin also points out that, quote, rampage shootings by Mark Lapine, Luke Woodham, Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, and Elliot Rodger, and Sung Hai Cho, the Virginia Tech shooter, were motivated at least in part by misogyny. Many school rampage shooters wrote manifestos, produced videos, or made political statements. Nearly all included right-wing rants. And I have to stop here because I have to point out that this is actually false.
God is gay.
Yeah, not really a right-wing rant, but I'll pick back up from there. Not only are rampage shootings the most masculine of crimes, and I'm going to pause there again, this is also false. In our closing article on trends and conclusions in this series, female school shootings are roughly proportional to the amount that women commit murder by handgun in the first place. And I don't know, maybe Larkin didn't take a statistics class when he was in college. I would assume he did. But his comments make me think that maybe he didn't, because it seems like that's something you would look at, the proportionality by which female shooters were committing these shootings in deciding whether or not these were masculine acts. But he chose not to do that. Anywho, picking back up, he says male participation rate is above 95%. That's wrong too. But he says they're also committed primarily by middle-class males. One understudied aspect of the motivation of rampage shooters is what Kalish and Kimmel referred to as aggrieved entitlement. Quote, feeling aggrieved, wronged by the world, these are typical adolescent feelings common to many boys and girls. What transforms the aggrieved into mass murderers is also a sense of entitlement, a sense of using violence against others, making others hurt as you yourself might hurt. Aggrieved entitlement inspires revenge against those who have wronged you. It is the compensation for humiliation. Humiliation is emasculation. Humiliate someone and you take away his manhood. For many men, humiliation must be avenged or you cease to be a man. Aggrieved entitlement is a gendered emotion. No, it's not. Sorry, I just had to interject because it's so stupid.
I don't think any emotions are gendered emotions.
You are correct.
I think that's a really toxic idea.
It is. And he says a fusion of that humiliating loss of manhood and the moral obligation and entitlement to get it back. And I wonder if that also applies to the female school shooters who he chose to ignore when he conducted his survey. Despite the extensive evidence Harris and Klebold left behind about their motivations, which do have some documented component of misogyny, and also many and extensively documented emasculations and a consequent cascade buildup of anger, resentment, contempt, narcissistic rage, and entitlements that follow, Sheriff John Stone and Under Sheriff John A. Dunaway wrote in the cover letter that they submitted with their May 15th report on the Columbine attack that they, quote, cannot answer the most fundamental question, why?
This claim is absurd. While clearly multifactorial, many factors emerge clearly as causative factors, even without direct comparison to other similar shootings.
Yeah, it enrages me how often people say stuff like this. They left behind so much. There are videos of them ranting. They both left behind journals that explain everything that happened to them.
Yep. They explain all of the bullying. They talk about their family life. They talk about
everything.
All of their friends. There's a long history of their interest in, the Oklahoma City bombing. They tried to even get other people to join them. They were going to gun shows. I don't
They
not
named
understand.
a pipe bomb after
Why?
a terrorist attack.
Why? We just don't know why.
We'll never know. We'll never know why.
Maybe you should open your eyes. In Comprehending Columbine, Larkin mentions Harris and Klebold vowing retribution for how they were treated by their peers and making comments during the shooting itself like, this is for what you did to us, citing the very same report on the Columbine attack in which Sheriff Stone and Under Sheriff Dunaway wrote that they, quote, cannot answer the most fundamental question, why?
It's laughable. In the Wiley Handbook, Larkin writes, quote, the fundamental contradictions between social status and masculinity percolated into an ideology in which civilized men practice eugenics in the betterment of the human race.
Ugh.
I hate this guy.
Me too.
He's awful. You see his picture? Look at him.
Yep.
Ugh.
He's like an annoying bird.
He is an annoying bird.
In Comprehending Columbine, Larkin theorized that the massacre triggered a kind of slow revolution of outcast, bullied, and otherwise disenfranchised students. Quote, an overtly political act in the name of oppressed students victimized by their peers. The Columbine shooting redefined such acts not merely as revenge, but as means of protest of bullying, intimidation, social isolation, and public rituals of humiliation.
Malcolm Gladwell agreed, and in 2015 he proposed what he called a threshold model of school shootings in the New Yorker magazine, in which Harris and Klebold were the first movers in, quote, a slow-motion, ever-evolving riot in which each new participant's action makes sense in reaction to and in combination with those who came before. This isn't part of the article, but all of this stuff seems like just sort of a weird cope and a way to get media attention. They're just sharing, they're just speaking nonsense, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it almost is, it seems like they didn't actually take the time to get to know Eric Harris or Dylan Klebold. They just wanted to talk about what they did in general without actually getting to know who the perpetrators are, which is a huge part of figuring out why people do what they do.
It almost seems to me like they're intentionally glorifying it.
It does have that feel to it. I agree. It does. And I feel like sometimes when people are glorifying, I mean, just the glorification of losers like Harris and Klebold, like, you can't know them unless you are straight up just ignoring the kind of people that they actually are. They're not people to be glorified. They're losers.
An overtly political act in the name of oppressed students victimized by their peers. It was a terrorist attack. It was 9/11 in a high school. They were not, I mean, they were literally bullied by their peers, but this was not some kind of political act. They just wanted to kill people because they were psychopaths.
Weren't the first, won't be the last. None of them should ever be glorified. They should be studied.
The fear of copycats has sometimes led to the closing of entire school districts, and it led to the destruction of many of the materials that were collected in the Columbine investigation.
Oh my God.
Which, up until the Parkland High School shooting in 2018, was the deadliest mass shooting at a high school in the United States.
That infuriates me so much.
Well,
how dare you destroy evidence?
What we're about to get into is probably going to infuriate you even more.
It will, yeah. I mean,
because a fandom for Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold has existed on the internet since just after the shootings.
Yeah.
An article published in the Journal of Transformative Works, a scholarly journal which focuses on the sociology of fandoms, claims that these types of fandoms are not functionally different from more mainstream fandoms. There's fan-made homoerotic art, fan fiction alternative histories about Klebold and Harris's future had they not become murderers, girls cosplay as sexy female Harris and Klebolds in the outfits that they wore on the day of the shootings. And this ties into the hybristophilia article that you've been working on, where they express sympathetic or even romantic or sexual interest in Harris and Klebold.
I think what's so fascinating about the hybristophilia stuff is that if Harris and Klebold hadn't done this, it's highly likely they would have just been ignored by these same women who now glorify them. Like, it's a paraphilia. It's the nature of the way that their brain operates in this delusional pattern. Like,
so
ugh.
Harris and Klebold even have their own line of toys, courtesy of Straight to Hell Toy Co., as you can see here. There's photos of all of this in the article if you click on the link. The fandom has been criticized for glorifying psychotic mass murderers. They murdered 12 students, 1 teacher, and then themselves they injured, 20 some odd people. 10 students killed in the library, not including the killers, who also committed suicide in the library. 21 people injured by gunshots, 3 injured attempting to escape.
I want to read what one teenager wrote on Tumblr.
Sure.
They said, I relate to their feelings of hopelessness, being angry and not being able to change it, and wanting to be accepted and appreciated. They wrote this, obviously, in reference to Harris and Klebold, and another added that no one noticed they were struggling and no one took their suffering seriously. So they're kind of like basically justifying what they did.
Absolutely.
And I think it is kind of a weird, like, they're like empathizing with these guys who would have no empathy for them. Or,
It's funny that you say that because the FBI's professional opinion was that Harris was a narcissistic psychopath and that Klebold had paranoid depression. Supervisory Special Agent Dwayne Fuselier, who is the agent in charge of the Columbine investigation and who is also a clinical psychologist, said, quote, "I believe Eric went to the school to kill and didn't care if he died, while Dylan wanted to die and did not care if others died as well."
Klebold repeatedly documented his suicidal ideations in his diary. And just before the attack, he recorded what were known as the basement tapes, where he reportedly said, quote, "Just know I'm going to a better place. I didn't like life too much." According to Agent Fuselier,
Fuselier, I think.
Fuselier,
Although it could be that, I don't know.
I think it's Fuselier, yeah. According to Agent Fuselier, Eric Harris has a pattern of grandiosity, contempt, and lack of empathy or remorse, which he concealed through deception. This is consistent with the traits of psychopaths.
I just want to say we're probably both wrong, and this guy's name is like Fuselier.
Fusili.
Other leading psychiatrists largely agree with the FBI's psychoanalysis of Harris and Klebold, and their support of the FBI's theory was used by author Dave Cullen to deny that bullying was a motivating factor in his 2009 book, Columbine.
Spoken like a true bully.
It's funny. They're like, he was a psychopath, and the other guy, he was suicidal. Well, obviously it wasn't because of bullying. I don't understand how that follows. It's just...
I think
you can have multiple factors that make things... In fact, it's extremely likely that it was multifactorial. It's very unlikely that it was just, I'm a psychopath, time to go kill a bunch of people. Not to say that doesn't happen, but it's fairly rare.
I think it is rare, and that tends to involve more severe mental illness, like paranoid delusions or like schizophrenia and like being psychotic, versus being like a psychopath or having ASPD or whatnot. Like, people are so complicated. People's circumstances are complicated. The journals they wrote were complicated. Their hormones were raging. Like, they're teenagers.
This seems a lot like the power and control style of serial killing. It's the same thing. It's just perpetrated all at once in a half an hour. But for all intents and purposes, they're just serial killers who did it quickly.
Yep.
The book, Columbine, cites multiple experts to dismiss Eric Harris as a kind of mere textbook psychopath and Dylan Klebold as a simple, angry depressive who could not possibly be motivated to target the high school that the book is named after, as if they couldn't possibly be seeking retribution for their perceived mistreatment as psychopaths or angry depressives, who often seek retribution for their perceived mistreatments. That's like a feature of narcissism.
Yep.
Cullen's Columbine, part of what Larkin, who himself participates in this, called a cottage industry of media surrounding Columbine, was timed to coincide with the 10th anniversary, and it spent 8 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, peaked at number 3.
Cullen claims he spent 10 years researching and writing Columbine, which gained considerable media attention for, supposedly disposing of Columbine-related myths.
It's insane that it has that reputation because they were explicitly highly bullied. And it was explicitly, they literally said, this is because of what you did to us.
I want to say, as someone who just spent 7 years writing a book, to hear this guy be like, I spent 10 years, and like he gets the main thing wrong. One of the main things, I'm like, ugh. Like, what were you doing for those 10 years?
He was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, and Columbine won a large number of awards, including the Edgar Allan Poe Award. He was honored by dozens of Best of 2009 lists, including the New York Times, the LA Times, Publishers Weekly, iTunes, and the American Library Association. It was declared the top education book of 2009 and among the best books of the decade by the American School Board Journal.
Well, I guess it's all about who you know.
I guess it's all about who's a dumbass who... Sometimes I think that things happen in our culture and there's like it's like these narratives are waves that are moving through society and that no one has any real control or agency. They just get swept up by this wave and they're like, yeah, this book was great. And meanwhile, it just really gets major details wrong.
Or like someone reads it and makes their initial whatever review, and like, do other people not read it? Are they just taking the review and like,
I don't know,
using the like Spark Notes version? Spark Notes still a thing?
So in this book, Harris is depicted as a mastermind with a messianic level superiority complex, and Klebold is depicted as a sheepish follower who participated in the massacre more or less only as a means to end his own life. Claims that bullying were a factor in the shooting, it says in Dave Cullen's Columbine, were a myth.
So, way to take the agency away from one of these murderers.
This is for what you did to us.
Yeah.
Myth.
Like, how clear can you be? And those words came straight from the shooter's mouth. Like, come on.
Wait until we get in a short while. We're going to get into some of these bullying incidents.
They're bad.
They're really bad.
Like, very much bullying. You cannot deny this was bullying.
I wouldn't have shot anyone over it. You've heard stories about me in high school, so you know what I was like. But I definitely would have enacted some violent retribution on the people who did this stuff to me if I was subject to this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have been well within your rights.
And yeah, I wouldn't have shot a bunch of people. I just would have.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
Yeah. I'm not going to say what I would have done.
I have a good imagination.
Yeah, you probably have some idea. His book has been met with some criticism. Klebold, not Harris, was the first to mention killing in his journal. There's evidence Harris was depressed as well. For instance, he was on antidepressants. There's an endless litany of evidence that supports the idea that bullying was a large motivating factor for both Harris and Klebold. They wrote about it extensively. They made verbal utterances directly referencing their experiences with bullies before the shooting, during the shooting, and via pre-recorded tapes, even after the shooting.
I don't understand how a book like this comes out. Like, does this guy have hybristophilia? What's going on?
I don't know. If you're listening to this, you can read Klebold and Harris's writings, their journal and diary, for yourself if you'd like. They're included as a PDF file in this article. And I think I actually included them in here twice just because it's a very long article. And I figured, if you're at the top portion and you just want to reference it to look, you can do that. And then if you're in the next portion and you just want to reference it to look, you can do that. It's just right there for you. Even the FBI conclusions that Cullen uses to dismiss bullying as a factor act as evidence that bullying was a factor, because the FBI concluded from their writings and the videos that Harris was a psychopath who exhibited narcissistic traits, unconstrained aggression, and a lack of empathy, while Klebold was an angry depressive, and this is me adding emphasis, with a vengeful attitude towards individuals who he believed had mistreated him. That's what the FBI said.
I greatly dislike that they made one seem like some genius and the other seem like...
By the way, look at his eyes.
And they made the other, like, they completely took his agency away. They were both nuts. And yeah, he has the Israel Keys eyes.
He has the crazy eyes, for sure.
He absolutely does. He would have been a serial killer.
Cullen is not the only one
traditional sense
who attempted to diagnose Harris and Klebold with mental illness to act as a scapegoat to deny bullying as a causative factor in the shootings, which is an interesting phenomenon surrounding the shooting that deserves more scrutiny from someone, somewhere, out in academia who is not me. I wrote that line when I wrote this because I just thought, why am I the one who... I'm not even a journalist. I'm just some guy who married a journalist. And now we started this journalism company. So I'm doing journalism even though I'm not a journalist. Why am I the one?
Better than most people.
I know, but why? Why?
I don't know. Peter Langman, PhD, a supposed expert on the psychology of school shooters, believes that neither bullying nor social rejection were factors in the school shooting. He seems to believe that mental illness was the only motivating cause, declaring that Harris was a psychopath and Klebold was schizotypal, though neither Harris nor Klebold were formally diagnosed with any personality disorders prior to their death.
Now, I want to say, I do believe that Harris was a psychopath. I'm less sure that Klebold was schizotypal, but I am sure, frankly, just based on his eyes, that Harris was a psychopath.
No, I'm with you. It's a familiar look.
But lots of psychopaths never kill anybody.
Yep.
So there are other factors that made them go and do this. Another expert in psychology, Professor Aubrey Immelman, PhD, who's an associate professor of psychology at the College of St. Benedict at St. John's University, published a personality profile of Harris based on journal entries and personal communications. And Immelman believes the materials suggest malignant narcissism, pathological narcissistic personality disorder with borderline and antisocial features, along with some paranoid traits and unconstrained aggression. And I just want to add that he is the only psychologist who's not affiliated with the FBI who I've seen attached to this in any way who I think is more or less correct in his remarks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The American Psychological Association notes trauma as a cause of personality disorders like narcissism, antisocial, borderline, obsessive compulsive, and schizotypal. Studies show clear links between traumas like being bullied and the development of personality disorders. Media at the time of the shooting featured distorted I need water. You want to take that over?
Sure. Media at the time of the shooting featured distorted, sensationalistic profiles of the shooters, like this excerpt from an April 22nd, 1999 article that was in the Washington Post. Go ahead.
This excerpt reads, "They hated jocks, admired Nazis, and scorned normalcy. They fancied themselves devotees of the Gothic subculture, even though they thrilled to the violence denounced by much of that fantasy world. They are white supremacists, but love music by anti-racist rock bands."
By the way, almost none of this is substantiated by the facts. Klebold was part Jewish. Harris praised Nazis in his journal, and he scratched swastikas into his knife sheaths, but it's not clear if this is due to some ideological identification he had with National Socialism, or if, like many teenagers, he was simply acting out in an attempt to shock others as a coping mechanism, like the kind often used by teens to signal a need for support while hiding intense feelings of fear, pain, and low self-esteem.
Yep. Eric David Harris was born on April 9th, 1981 in Wichita, Kansas. Harris's mother, Catherine Ann Poole, was a homemaker, and his father was a U.S. Air Force transport pilot. As a result, the Harris family frequently relocated.
In 1983, they moved to Dayton, Ohio, when he was 2. And 6 years later, they moved to Oscoda, Michigan. There was a pastor in Michigan named William Stone who lived across the street from the family while they were in Escoda. And Stone recalled them as great neighbors, and he saw Wayne as being very engaged with his family.
The Harris family then moved to Plattsburgh, New York in 1991. During his time there at Stafford Middle School, Harris played Little League Baseball, regularly went to birthday parties, and was, quote, part of the crowd. Kyle Ross, a former classmate of Harris, said, "He was just a typical guy." That's not what he said. He said, "He was just a typical kid."
Same difference. When his father retired from the military in July 1993, they moved again to Littleton, Colorado. His father took a job with Flight Safety Services Corporation, and his mother, formerly a homemaker, became a caterer. And they lived in rented apartments for their first 3 years in Colorado. During this time, Harris attended Ken Carroll Middle School, and that's when Harris and Klebold became friends. By the time they were juniors in high school, they were described as inseparable. Harris entered Columbine as a freshman in 1995.
He was left forward and midfield on the Columbine soccer team for his freshman and sophomore year, and according to one of his teammates, John Swanson, Harris was a solid soccer player who enjoyed the sport a lot.
It was Josh Swanson.
Josh Swanson. I am so sorry.
We're very tired.
Yeah.
In 1996, they bought a house less than 3 miles south of Columbine High School at 8276 South Reed Street in Littleton. On a 1997 English class assignment, Harris wrote about the difficulty of the move from New York to Colorado. He said, quote, "It was the hardest moving from Plattsburgh. I have the most memories from there. When I left when he left my friends, I felt alone, lost, and even agitated that I had spent so much time with them, and now I have to go because of something I can't stop."
Harris had a chest deformity known as pectus excavatum.
Excavatum, maybe, actually.
I think it's excavatum, but it's 4 a.m. In which the breastbone sticks into the chest, which made him very self-conscious and reluctant to take his shirt off in gym class. Where other students would mock him for his condition, Harris had 2 cosmetic surgeries at age 12 and 13 to repair it, but it was still observable at the time of his autopsy.
Some people described Harris as charismatic. Others described him as nice and likable. He often bragged about his ability to deceive others, and he once said that he could make anyone believe anything. By his junior year, he was known for his quick temper and also for threatening people with bombs, which doesn't sound charismatic, nice, or likable.
It really doesn't. Classmates remember Harris being fascinated by war and writing out violent fantasies about killing people he didn't like. During his freshman year, Harris met a girl named Tiffany Teifer, and they had German class together, in which they flirted with each other. Harris asked Tiffany to go to homecoming with him, and she accepted. After the homecoming, for reasons that have never been disclosed, Tiffany was apparently no longer interested in seeing Harris anymore. I feel like we can all put 2 and 2 together.
I think so, too. When she refused to continue socializing with him after homecoming, he staged a fake suicide with fake blood splashed all over him. And when she saw him on the ground, she began to scream for help, and then he and his friends started laughing, and she stormed off, shouting at him to get psychological help, and she reportedly never spoke to him again.
Poor girl. Good for her. It must have been weird to see that as a prank and then to see the Columbine photos.
I bet it was.
It was probably just a very strange experience. Anyway, after the shooting, Tiffany was quoted in the media as saying, "I want to go back for sure." The 18-year-old senior said, wearing a Columbine High School ribbon in her hair. quote, "I don't want to go to Chatsfield. I'd rather go back to Columbine just to have closure."
Harris reportedly wanted to join the Marine Corps, but his application was rejected shortly before the shootings because he was taking an antidepressant, and he was required to take it as part of his court-ordered anger management therapy. And he lied on his application to Marines and did not disclose that he was taking any medications. So after meeting with Harris and his parents April 15th, the Marines disqualified him from military service. Marine First Lieutenant Jeff Sammons, who's a spokesman in Quantico, told the Denver Post, "It was a follow-up meeting at Eric Harris' parents' home with his parents present in the evening time. It was disclosed at that time that he had a medical disqualification, and we informed Eric he was not eligible for enlistment in the Marines."
Dylan Klebold was... I actually want to make a comment real quick before I move on to Dylan's background, but that had to be difficult. Like, he grew up with his dad. I grew up in a military family. You know, a bunch of my siblings, all of my siblings except me went into the military after, and I know that had to be hard for him. Well, probably not only as a psychopath, because a lot of psychopaths want to go into the military, licensed to kill and all, but I'm sure there was an element there of, like, him being disqualified that made him feel even worse about himself. Just, that is pure speculation on my part.
I mean, you have to be right. I guess you don't have to be right, but I think you're right.
Dylan Klebold was brought up in a house with mixed religious traditions, a kind of Lutheran Jew. His mother, Sue Klebold, nee Yasinoff, was the granddaughter of philanthropist Leo Yasinoff, a prominent member of the Jewish community in Columbus, Ohio, who left his multi-million-dollar fortune to charity and has a Jewish community center named after him in Columbus. I hate when I hear stories about millionaires doing that. I'm like, really? You're not going to leave anything to your family? Like, it just puts a bad taste in my mouth. It just makes me think that they're not nice people.
I mean, you don't know that he didn't leave anything to his family. He may have.
Fair enough, I guess. But just based on what I know about Dylan, I'm not necessarily seeing it.
I don't know. Ostensibly Lutheran, the family also observed some rituals of Judaism at home to honor Eric's great-grandfather, although they seem to have chosen the Lutheran Church over temple. Both Dylan and his older brother attended confirmation classes at St. Philip's Lutheran Church, and both parents regularly attended Lutheran Church with their children. According to Reverend Don Markshausen, that's a name, pastor of Littleton's St. Philip Lutheran Church, Dylan recited the 4 questions at a Passover Seder shortly before the shootings, after which he was buried in a Lutheran service. Klebold's parents were pacifists who did not keep firearms in their home.
He sounded just confused in general.
I'm sure that didn't help. It sounds like a pretty weird religious upbringing.
It really does. Dylan Bennett Klebold was born in Lakewood, Colorado, to Thomas and Sue Klebold on September 11th, 1981.
He had an older brother named Byron. They were each named after a renowned poet. Dylan was named after the playwright Dylan Thomas, and Byron after Lord George Gordon Byron. I just wanted to mention that.
During his early years, Klebold played t-ball, baseball, and soccer. His parents met when they were both studying art at Ohio State University. After graduating, they married in 1971, and their first child, Byron, was born in 1978.
They sound like hippies.
They absolutely do. And the weird, confused religious stuff is super weird, too. It makes me think that it's a lot of performative...
hippiness?
Yeah, absolutely. Thomas initially worked as a sculptor, but became an engineer to be more financially stable for his family. I would love to see Dylan Klebold's father's sculptures.
According to reports, Klebold was exceptionally bright but appeared sheltered in elementary school. He was an advanced student, and he became part of something called CHIPS, Challenging High Intellectual Potential Students, in the Littleton school system. But when he transitioned to middle school, he found the change difficult socially, and his classmates remember him as being painfully shy and uncomfortably quiet. Uncomfortably quiet. He was often fidgety whenever someone new talked to him. He rarely opened up to people, and his parents were unconcerned and assumed that this was just regular behavior amongst adolescents.
Does his brother act like that? That's not how his brother was described.
I don't know. Parents who do this stuff, I don't understand it.
I mean, they're just not paying attention. They don't care. They're ignoring them.
It does make it seem
not
very,
involved.
very neglectful. And as you may remember from our podcast that we just recorded, neglect was cited as the only factor greater than ADHD in that study in regards to criminality. They said that neglect could be identified as causing more imprisonment in adulthood than ADHD, untreated ADHD.
I mean, it sounds like he really was neglected to a point where, like, he wasn't even socialized.
Oh, yeah. They're like, hey, your son's not talking to anybody. And they're like, that's normal for kids.
That's Byron. I mean, Dylan. Like,
all my kids never talk to anybody. That's normal.
We don't talk to them either, apparently. Although exceptionally nervous with the opposite sex, sometimes he avoided girls altogether. Dylan did snag a date to the prom with his reported girlfriend, Robin Anderson, just 3 days before the shootings.
And as you may recall from earlier I'm probably going to split these up because at this point we're at 2 hours, 30 minutes. So as you may recall from the last podcast on this, maybe I won't. Maybe you'll recall it from earlier in this one. I just release it as a 3 hour long podcast. But they enlisted Anderson, who was 18, and she was an old friend of Klebold's as well. But they used her to make straw purchases of the shotguns and the high-point carbine. And in exchange for her cooperation with the investigation that followed the shootings, no charges were filed against her as a result.
Honestly, she was so young. Like, I think she kind of seems like a sweet girl. Again, I'm not one to take agency away from people. She knew them, and she just seems kind of out of place if you look at the photos of them.
She does. There's a picture
she looks like happy and sweet and
there's
smiling.
There's a picture of the three of them sitting next to each other, and there's these two kids who look like psychopaths.
They do.
And then there's this, like, sweet girl sitting next to them, just like, ah la la.
Like, it's such a weird discrepancy. She actually reminds me of this girl that I used to know who was, like, just so kind and nice. She had, like, blonde hair like that and, like, a nice big smile. And these two idiots over here are, like, they're doing the psychopath glare, like the intentional, I don't know.
So Dylan Klebold went to Cub Scouts with Brooks Brown. They had been friends since the first grade. Klebold met Harris in middle school, and as we described earlier, they quickly became best friends. Klebold introduced Harris to Brown, and Harris introduced Klebold to his friend Nathan Dykeman, who was another student who attended their middle school and who's quoted later in this article. They all became friends. There's a picture of Dylan Klebold and Brooks Brown in Cub Scouts as kids here. And I have to say, I do think that Eric Harris, at least visually, he looks more psychotic than Dylan. Even as a kid, he has the crazy eyes.
Dude, his childhood photo, like, there is something wrong with him.
Oh, yeah, pretty obviously.
It is. It's very obvious. If you just as someone who's done a lot of research, sometimes I get curious about people like that I don't even know, and I've never like looked anyone up, but I'm going through yearbooks like looking for photos of like people in the stories I'm writing or like talking about or my book, and like sometimes I come across photos like that of kids, and I'm just like, hey, someone needs to watch out for that one. Like there is a look, and it is apparent very early on, and maybe you just have to know what to look for. I don't know.
Well, there are studies that show you can see psychopathology on people's faces and in their eyes. There are studies that support that that's a thing. That's not a myth. That's a real thing. Psycho eyes are real.
That's absolutely true.
As we discussed earlier, and as we will discuss further below, Harris threatened to further below. I'm talking. As we discussed earlier, and we'll discuss again later, Harris threatened to kill Brown in 1997, but let him go unharmed on the day of the shooting because they made up. Over time, Klebold and Harris became increasingly close. They hung out, they went bowling, they carpooled together, they played Doom over a private server connected to their personal computers, and again, by junior year of high school, people called them inseparable.
One day after the shooting, I'm sorry.
No, that was correct.
On the day after the shooting.
I just want to point out that is one day after the shooting.
It is. God, I can't wait to go to sleep. On the day after the shooting, Klebold's mother said that shortly after Klebold's birth, she felt a shadow had been cast over her. What a hippie. Anyway, warning her that this child would bring her great sorrow. That is... okay.
I know, she sounds like somebody who would raise somebody who would kill somebody.
She does. And also, if that's some weird paranoid thing that you get, who is to say that if she ever verbalized that very inappropriately to her young kid, that she didn't instill that kind of feeling in them by creating that situation?
She may have.
And I know that, like, that stuff's very complicated. It's not all nature and nurture. But, like, saying something like that to a child is not okay.
She said to Colorado Public Radio, quote, "I think I still make of it what I did at the time. It was a passing feeling that went over very quickly, like a shadow."
Nuts.
Chad Laughlin was a friend of Harris and Klebold, and he said that they often kept to themselves and sat alone at lunch together. And a rumor eventually started that Harris and Klebold were gay and romantically involved, supposedly due to the amount of time they spent together. It is unknown if they were aware of this rumor, although it seems likely.
It does. With everything else, it seems like people just probably said it to their face.
So here's the best part. I don't know if you knew this, but Judy Brown believed Harris was emotionally dependent on Klebold and sought validation from Harris, who was... Judy Brown believed Harris was emotionally dependent on Klebold, who sought validation from Harris, who was more liked by the broader student population. In his journals, though, Klebold wrote that he felt he was not accepted or loved by anyone. Klebold's mother worked at a psychiatric hospital as a therapeutic arts teacher.
Doesn't that just figure?
It sure does.
Honestly, in all the time trying to even look for a therapist for myself personally, I think that therapists go into it, a lot of them, because they have issues themselves.
They absolutely do.
And so you're getting therapy from people who need therapy. It's weird.
I might get this exact number wrong because I'm just remembering it off the top of my head, but specific to therapists, not psychiatrists, but specific to therapists, upwards of 85% of them have diagnosable mental disorders.
Not shocked in any way.
So if you're looking for a therapist, shop around.
Absolutely. And shop around a lot, because it might take you a while.
It might.
It's going to cost a lot of money, too. Sorry.
So his mother, with her therapeutic psychiatric artwork that she did, she believed that Harris's rage and Klebold's self-destructive personality created what she called an excessively unhealthy friendship that she did nothing to dissuade.
It's like a shadow.
The most prevalent themes in Klebold's diary are his despair at his perceived lack of success with women, which he refers to as an infinite sadness. That's his exact words. And he also writes about his desire to commit suicide.
I'm sorry, the infinite sadness part, I'm like, are you just describing being horny? Like, what is, what?
It reminds me a lot of Elliot Rodger.
Yeah.
I mentioned that earlier in the article, but it struck me again just now.
The misogyny in the girlfriend's bit is interesting.
Just the line infinite sadness, it just makes me think of Roger. In 1996, then 15-year-old Eric Harris created a private website which was hosted by then popular internet provider America Online, also known as AOL. And he used it to host levels that Harris created for video games like Doom and Quake. And these were known as Doom WADs. And he started keeping a blog on his website, detailing his adventures sneaking out of the house to cause mischief with Klebold and other friends. They called these adventures rebel missions.
In early 1997, the blog postings began to show their first signs of Harris's homicidal intent. And by the end of the year, the site contained explicit instructions on how to make explosive devices. And when the pair began experimenting with pipe bombs, they posted results of the explosions on their website. So, very, very clear.
The site attracted very few visitors until August of 1997, when Harris made a blog post detailing murderous fantasies ending with, "All I want to do is kill and injure as many of you as I can, especially a few people, like Brooks Brown."
Who he ironically let go.
He did.
Brown was a classmate at Columbine. They lived near each other, and their parents had... I can't. I'm sorry.
Even our dog is yawning at us. He wants us to go to bed.
He came over here to try to get us. He does that. He has a clock. He has a system.
He does.
He's a good boy.
But if you want to be successful, sometimes you got to work until 5 o'clock in the morning.
Brown was a classmate at Columbine. He
Here,
I'm Colin Blind.
I'll just let it roll. You want some help?
Yeah.
Brown was a classmate at Columbine who lived near the house Harris's parents bought in Littleton, and he rode the same bus as Harris. They had been friends since middle school, but after Brown's parents saw the threats, they contacted the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office on August 7th, 1997. An investigator wrote a draft affidavit to request a search warrant for the house, but it was never submitted to a judge.
Oh, look at that.
Endless police incompetence everywhere.
Yep.
On April 30th, 1999, officials representing Jefferson County and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office met to decide if they should reveal this to the public, but the affidavit's contents lacked the necessary probable cause, and they decided not to disclose this information at a press conference that they held on April 30th, as they felt it had no relevance.
Over the next 2 years...
I'm going to leave that in.
Okay. Over the next 2 years, Guerra's original draft and investigative file documents were lost. I'm sure they were.
Air quotes.
Yeah. In September 1999, a Jefferson County investigator failed to find the documents during a search of the county's computer system. A second attempt in the late 2000s found copies of the document within the Jefferson County archives. Their loss was termed troubling by a grand jury convened after the file's existence was reported in April of 2001. Absolutely troubling is the right word to describe that. It was concealed by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and not revealed until September of 2001, thanks to an investigation by the TV show 60 Minutes. The documents were what?
I just wanted to say back when people did journalism still.
Oh, I know. It's bad. It's bad out there. Murderpop Magazine's great, though.
Absolutely.
You did an incredible job with these.
It's because I'm not a journalist.
And,
I am a writer.
Wonder how many people listening will get that reference.
Almost none.
That is so sad.
I know, it's a great movie.
The documents were reconstructed and released to the public. But the original documents are still missing. Hi.
On January 30th, 1998, Harris and Klebold were both arrested on one of their rebel missions for breaking into a parked van and stealing tools and computer equipment. They subsequently attended a joint court hearing where both pled guilty to felony theft and were both sentenced to a juvenile diversion program. They both attended mandatory anger management classes. They were counseled by juvenile diversion officers, and both were released from diversion several weeks early and put on probation. The probation officer discharged both of them from the program a few months ahead of schedule for good behavior. Regarding Harris, the officer remarked he was, quote, a very bright individual who is likely to succeed in life. Klebold was said to be intelligent, but, quote, needs to understand that hard work is part of fulfilling a dream.
What dream? What dream is he talking about?
What dreams may come. Shortly after the court hearing for the van break-in, Harris reverted his website back to just hosting Doom and Quake. And he began to write his thoughts down in a journal that his classmates could not access from the internet, but which you can. Klebold had been keeping a personal journal since as early as March 31st, 1997, which he titled A Virtual Book, Existences. Ugh.
Yeah.
Horrible teenage poetry he must have written.
Which he used existences to vent about his personal problems. Of which there were many.
Yes, there were.
There are so many jokes I wanted to make about that police officer making a comment about him working harder, and I'm like, well, thank God he's in it, because, like, none of the bombs...
Some of those bombs might have gone off.
Yeah. He talks, in his journal, he talks about his depression and suicidal thoughts over 2 years prior to the massacre.
I have to, I want to interject here. I'm not really interjecting, I just want to take over and read this part of this next one, because I have a comment to make.
Hey, buddy.
Klebold often wrote about his view that he and Harris were godlike, more highly evolved than other human beings, which must be why his journal contains lots of self-loathing and suicidal intentions. So godlike...
We just don't understand.
So godlike, he was constantly depressed because he felt he was a failure with women.
Like God.
Like a god. Okay. Page after page of his journal was covered in hearts, and he was secretly in love with another Columbine student, although it is unknown who, as the documents were redacted for the privacy of survivors. I think that's fair.
I think it is.
I wouldn't want to be the 17-year-old girl who was known forever as Dylan Klebold's high school crush.
Absolutely.
In November of 1997, Klebold wrote about going on a killing spree. It's the first time he did that. Detailing what he would wear, pontificating that life was no fun without a little death, and that he would like to spend the last moments of his life in the midst of murder and bloodshed. He concluded by saying he would kill himself afterwards in order to leave a world he hated and go to a better place, by which I assume he means nowhere. Klebold was described as being hot-headed but depressive and suicidal.
Harris and Klebold extensively plot their assault on Columbine in their journals. Harris wrote one plan that included hijacking an aircraft at Denver International Airport and crashing it into New York City, foreshadowing the September 11th attacks 5 years later.
Yeah,
this was a really weird, strange, interesting note to me.
It kind of underscores that the attack was a form of terrorism.
Absolutely.
That's why I included it.
I really think that probably it was the school because of the bullying aspect and the love interest aspect and whatnot, but they could have, failed with their pipe bombs anywhere.
That's true.
And I think that they had plans for that. Like, they literally tried to set them up outside of the premises. And anyway, the connection to terrorism is fascinating. And more people don't talk about it.
But we are.
Absolutely.
According to their journal entries, they seemed to begin planning the attack nearly 11 months beforehand in May of 1998. They both left behind several journals and home videos that they made both alone and together, explaining their motives, which makes it baffling. The police said we would never know why. They hoped the content would be viewed extensively and inspire followers, which they didn't even need the content for. It happened even though police never released it, on the basis that they thought it would do what happened anyway.
It's kind of a weird communal narcissism thing.
It is definitely a communal narcissism thing.
On their part, but also on the part of law enforcement for different reasons. It's very weird.
It is. You're not protecting anybody.
Nope.
The way to protect people is to disclose stuff, and to disclose it in a way that does not glorify these two. I'm working on not cursing in these, so I'm going to call them chuckleheads.
Harris and Klebold reportedly discussed their motives for the attacks in these videos, which the local sheriff who destroyed them described as, quote, a call to arms.
Seems like something that could have been of use to researchers.
God, that makes me so angry.
Harris made entries in his journal on topics related to his sexuality, describing sexual fantasies involving rape and torture of women in his bedroom. And he also wrote about a sexual interest in cannibalism, and wrote that he would like to have animalistic sex, that's a quote, and then dismember a woman to eat her flesh.
Ew.
Yeah, weird fantasy.
Well, I think we know why his prom date stopped talking to him.
You think he proposed that after prom?
I don't know.
Baby, I want to have animalistic sex and then dismember you to eat your flesh. Want to come inside?
I don't even know what to say to that.
I don't like coffee.
What?
That's what I would say to it.
Oh.
I don't like coffee.
Oh, I get it.
Oh.
Keeps me up at night.
Seinfeld reference. Like all great writers, Harris wrote a paper on school shootings titled Guns in School, and a poem from the perspective of a bullet. You know, my poem almost got me expelled, and it wasn't from the perspective of a bullet.
God, they're just so cringy.
They are.
I will say I love the opening sequence of Lord of War. The perspective of the bullet. But,
Well,
yeah,
that wasn't written by a school shooter. As far as I know.
No, it was written by, well, you know,
a writer.
A screenwriter. I was going to be an actual writer. Harris and Klebold's schoolwork both displays themes of violence in their creative writing. Harris wrote a paper on Nazis, and Klebold wrote a paper on Charles Manson.
There was also Harris wrote a Doom video game based story, and his teacher wrote, "Yours is a unique approach, and your writing works in a gruesome way. Good details and mood setting."
Klebold also wrote a short story about a man killing students, which apparently worried his teacher enough that she alerted his parents. You can't get more obvious than that.
In a psychology class, Harris wrote that he dreamed of going on a shooting spree with Klebold. Harris's journals described several experimental bomb detonations, and the year before the massacre, Klebold wrote in Harris's 1998 yearbook, "Killing enemies, blowing up stuff, killing cops. My wrath for January's incident will be godlike, not to mention our revenge in the commons." And this is where we get into some of the bullying stuff. The commons was slang in the school for the school cafeteria, but the reference to the January incident is a lot more obscure, and it's something that hasn't been widely talked about in reference to the Columbine stuff. Many assume that this refers to their arrest for the van break-in, including the police and even some of their friends. And there's an excerpt here from a friend named Nate Dykeman, who said they wanted revenge on the cops for arresting them in January 98 because that ruined them on so many personal levels. Dylan was absolutely embarrassed, hardcore. He was ashamed of his arrest to a degree that just made him snap. His life was over with that arrest. He felt he could never get a job or be trusted by his family again. The arrest had a deep, saddening effect on his life. I said, "Is this the reason you can't go out?" And he got all red and told me he didn't want to talk about it. That interpretation seems nonsensical to Randy Brown, who's Brooks Brown's father. And it also seems nonsensical to me.
It doesn't make sense.
No. I don't know what Nate Dykeman's doing now, but I bet it doesn't involve intense intellectual work. Sorry, Nate.
I'm with you on that.
The sheriff's office never contacted Harris's parents. They never took any legal action against Eric Harris as a result of Brown's complaints, a failure that featured heavily in several of the lawsuits that followed against the county in the wake of Columbine. If they wanted revenge on the police, they would have gone to a police station, Brown says. Where did they go to kill people? He seems like a smart guy.
Yep.
The sheriff's report on the Columbine high school shooting is guarded in addressing the threats Harris made, presumably because they lost the affidavit that they never filed for a search warrant that would have found these pipe bombs and some of the guns, and I don't know. Actually, I said that, but not immediately after saying it, I'm not sure that the timing actually works out on that. But I bet they would have found some writing that suggested some things. Anyway, since the detective assigned to the case had no record of meeting with Randy and Judy Brown in his office in March 1998, as the Browns claim happened, what further investigation did they do? As they claim that they initiated further investigation but did not develop any additional information. So they don't even have a record of the meeting. They lost the affidavit. They seem to just be claiming that they did further investigation.
Like, are they on crack?
Maybe they are. So the report doesn't say what further investigation they did, but it seems like investigators were convinced that the January incident referred to the arrest. Randy Brown believes that the January incident refers to one of two events at Columbine during January. You know, the high school where they conducted the shooting, and not the arrest for the van break-in.
The first January incident was an unfounded accusation that Harris and Klebold had brought marijuana to school, which resulted in a search of their property. They both found this violating, humiliating, and enraging. The second January incident was exactly the kind of bullying that might, focus someone's hatred on the commons. as Randy Brown describes it, quote, people surrounding them. That's not what he said. Quote, people surrounded them in the commons and squirted ketchup packets all over them, laughing at them, calling them Faggots. That happened while teachers watched. They couldn't fight back. They wore the ketchup all day and went home covered with it.
I just want to say they could have fought back but didn't. Instead, they nursed their rage like the losers that they were.
That's a good point. In Brooke Brown's book on the massacre, No Easy Answers, he noted that teachers commonly ignored bullying and that when Harris and Klebold were bullied by the jocks at Columbine, they would make statements like, "Don't worry, man, it happens all the time."
Being outcasts and dealing with social rejection were also highlighted as factors. Social cliques within high school, like the Trenchcoat Mafia, were widely discussed. According to Chad Laughlin, who was a classmate of theirs, this incident involved seniors pelting Klebold with ketchup-covered tampons in the commons. And Laughlin also stated that a lot of the tension in the school came from the class above us. There were people fearful of walking by a table where you knew you didn't belong, stuff like that. Certain groups certainly got preferential treatment across the board.
That is so crazy. Harris and Klebold were both enrolled in video production classes and kept 5 videotapes that were recorded with school video equipment. Only 2 of these have been released to the public in full.
I just wanted to, I never had an experience quite like that, and I don't want to go into too much detail here or spend too much time on this, but it's crazy to me that they didn't do anything about that incident, that they just nursed it for... I just can't believe it. It's just insane.
It is. Especially with the rage stuff and the impulse control problems that, Klebold is described as having. I'm surprised that the response was that. It made me wonder how outnumbered they were. I don't know what the circumstances were, but I'm surprised. I definitely would have been doing something back myself.
I don't know.
In the moment.
I personally wouldn't have cared about the outnumbered thing.
At least, I say that now, but I was never bullied like that. So
I had a couple incidents that they weren't really like that, but they hewed in that direction. And I reacted a lot more strongly than they seem to have, as you know.
Well, it makes people stop because they realize there are consequences.
Yes.
And they can't mess with you.
Yep.
So one of their videos was called Hitman for Hire, which you can find if you click the link in the description to the Murder PM article. If you're a subscriber, the video is there in full. And, yeah.
I actually think this is a free article, so even if you're not a subscriber, you can go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, go check it out. The remaining 3 tapes detailed their plan and the reasons for the massacre. Most were shot in the Harris family basement and are known as the basement tapes. 30 minutes before the attack, they made a final video apologizing to their friends and families and saying goodbye.
In December of 1999, Time magazine published an article on the tapes. The pair claimed they were going to make copies to send to news stations, but they never did. Transcripts of some of the dialogue and a short clip that was secretly recorded by a victim's father still exist. The victims' family members threatened to sue Jefferson County, and as a result, some victims' families and some journalists were allowed to view them, although the tapes were then withheld from the public until 2011, when they were destroyed for fear of inspiring future massacres as a call to arms. And I think we're both too tired to read it, but if you're interested, there's an excerpt about their rage where they complain about their family and moving, and Eric whines about having to be the new kid in school and blah, 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 blah,
I mean,
blah.
he also literally says he hated the way people made fun of him.
He did.
My face, my hair, my shirts, like...
We'll never know why they did this.
It's all there. I cannot believe they destroyed these tapes. It makes me so angry. I can't believe that. I can't imagine how I'd feel if one of my kids died in that, and this is how it was handled.
Klebold literally talks about, he says, "You made me what I am. You added to the rage." And by the way, to answer the question you asked earlier, he also talks about how his older brother Byron was popular and athletic. And he constantly made fun of him, as did his brother's friends.
And apparently, according to Dylan, with the exception of his parents, which, I don't actually believe. Well, actually, maybe they didn't really treat him a certain way because they were just uninvolved. But Dylan apparently said that his extended family treated him like he was the runt of the litter.
So we'll never know why they did this, but Dylan Klebold says, "I'm going to kill you all. You've been giving us shit for years."
I wonder why they did this.
It's a mystery. Despite early accounts of the shooting, which said they were very unpopular students and targets of bullying, despite the fact that Klebold and Harris both personally wrote about being bullied outcasts, despite the fact that sources support accounts of bullying specifically directed towards Harris and Klebold, despite accounts of them actually being outcasts, many so-called experts, as you've heard, have called these claims false, on the grounds that both of them had a small-knit group of friends and a wider social group of associates.
Do they just not want to do the work? Like, what's the deal?
I don't...
Are they like, oh, well, this person said it and they're well known, so I need to agree with it because I want to... Like, what the...
I don't know
what
if
is wrong with you?
I don't know if you remember, but I made
Cowards.
fun of this guy, Peter Langman, PhD,
Yeah.
who I call a supposed expert on school shooters and mass violence, because he argues against bullying being a motivating factor in the attack. And Dave Cullen, the Columbine book that we talked about, who disputes that it was revenge for bullying. But does Langman think that outcasts have no friends at all? Because most people who are outcasts have some small group of friends.
Yeah, who are also outcasts.
Yeah, they're all outcasts. That's how that works. They're not just like one dude. That's not a clique. I don't understand.
No, that's called a loner.
So, while acknowledging the pervasiveness of bullying in high schools, including Columbine, and in spite of writing about episodes in which they were bullied, Cullen and Langman claim they were not victims of bullying, not outcasts, and Cullen claimed that Harris was more often the bully than the victim of bullies. Which, maybe the bullying was reciprocal, but based on that incident about the ketchup, I have a hard time seeing that.
No, that's pretty bad. Like, ketchup-soaked tampons that you're being pelted with while people call you names? That's not...
In a fact check, which I put in quotes because it's not factual, this was published April 19th, 2019 by Gillian, or maybe Jillian, Brockle, or Brackel, I don't know and I don't care, in the Washington Post, claimed that, quote, "Contrary to the popular view, Columbine was not revenge for being bullied." Harris and Klebold were regularly called Faggots. Nathan Vanderow, a friend of Klebold, and Alyssa Owen, who knew Harris, noted they were often picked on. Vanderow recalled when a cup of fecal matter was thrown at them.
I can't even imagine. And I'm not saying that like, oh, poor kids. Like, I mean, it does suck. Like, it does suck that they had to go through that. But, like, they did some messed up stuff, and I don't feel bad for them.
I don't necessarily feel bad for them in that regard, you know?
But in these isolated events, they don't deserve that. No one
No,
does. No
nobody
one
deserves
deserves that at all. So,
And there's another story about Harrison Klebold being confronted by a group of students, you heard this earlier,
yeah.
pelting them with tampons covered in ketchup and or squirting them with ketchup packets while calling them FAGGOTS and QUEERS. Klebold told his mother it was the worst day of his life. Harris's last journal entry reads, quote, "I hate you people for leaving me out of so many fun things." Klebold wrote, quote, "The lonely man strikes out with absolute rage."
In an interview, their close friend, Brooks Brown, described them as the school's worst outcasts. Quote, "The losers of the losers."
Columbine was known to have an intense jock culture. But again, this concept has been questioned on the grounds that Harrison Klebold had what was called a close circle of friends, which seems like it was largely a circle of two. And they had a wider informal social group. They did
Like
have
at school.
They did have some friends. I mean, Klebold, who whined that he couldn't get a girlfriend, had a date, a very pretty date that he took to prom.
Yeah.
So,
And also, Harris literally got a prom. He got a yes 3 days before he decided to kill a bunch of people. He got a prom date.
she never talked to him again after that because he had fantasies of eating her flesh. I'm speculating.
I thought that was a different.
No.
I thought he asked her. Oh wait, no, I'm just confused because I'm really
Confusing the
tired.
two.
It's about it's
5 a.m.
closing on 5 a.m.
So when
I'm sorry, my bad. But still, like that's a self-sabotagey thing as well.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't keep your weird thoughts to yourself. You finally got a prom date. Like,
But
why'd you have to be so weird?
Langman and Cullen both argue that the pair are not loners or outcasts. Cullen claims they were not in the Trenchcoat Mafia and thus were not isolated outcasts or loners, because apparently being in the Trenchcoat Mafia, which was like almost a dozen people, and who
didn't wear trench coats?
they did, some of them did.
I'm just making fun of there's a photo of all of them, the group
just
for the yearbook.
apparently being in the Trenchcoat Mafia is some kind of prerequisite for being an outcast or a loner. It seems weird.
It
Weird
seems
claim.
like a huge contradiction to the whole, like...
It does.
I feel like sometimes the outcasts and loners are the people that are like, so-and-so was not here for their photo today, and they're, like, listed.
So he claims they weren't outcasts or loners, but their Hitmen for Hire video is almost seemed like a dress rehearsal. And it shows them walking the halls of the school, shooting fake bullies outside with fake guns. Pretty on the nose.
Yep. In the wake of the shooting, victims Rachel Scott and Cassie Bernal came to be regarded as Christian martyrs by evangelical Christians. Christian churches use the martyr narrative of Scott's and Bernal's deaths to promote themselves and recruit members.
And
Typical.
I thought that this was an interesting parallel, an echo of the wider social phenomenon that has seen a fandom of the shooters grow on the internet and social media. Unlike bullied kids who identify with bullied kids that lash out, which has been derided as a myth, the accounts used to turn evangelical Christian victims into martyrs are apocryphal, based on false witness testimony. The closest living witness to Rachel Scott's death, Richard Castaldo, stated that Harris asked Scott if she believed in God and murdered her after she answered, "You know I do." But Castaldo later said he wasn't sure that she actually answered this way. And a lot of media attention was focused on Cassie Bernal, who was killed by Harris in the library, and who Harris was reported to have asked, "Do you believe in God?" immediately before he shot her. And she was widely reported to have responded yes. But Emily Wyant, the closest living witness to her death, denied that Bernal and Harris had any such exchange.
That sounds like I As someone who has grown up, I grew up so religious. This is very typical. I absolutely believe that someone made this up.
I do too. I didn't
It's a
grow up
very
religious, but
common thing.
it's definitely, it skews towards my experience of Christians, for
It,
sure.
it actually makes me think of there's this thing that went around about Anton LaVey, who founded the Church of Satan, and on his deathbed, he confessed to believing in Jesus Christ.
No, we didn't.
That's the rumor. I was even told that, and I was like, there is no way.
That's not real. That didn't
There is
happen.
no way. And, well, it's just it's the same thing. It's to, get members or whatever.
I'm not like a huge fan of LaVey, but I think that they made that up because he literally said, this is a quote from LaVey that I just happen to have in my brain, but he said, there will be no deathbed confession.
Right.
That's an actual quote.
Yeah.
So the fact that Christians claim that he made one, it just seems like a gaslighty response to that quote.
It's super typical. They just make shit up like that.
Another witness, Joshua Lapp, thought Bernal had been asked about her belief, but was unable to correctly point out where Bernal was located, and was closer to survivor Valine Schnurr during the shootings. Craig Scott claimed the discussion was with Bernal, but when asked to indicate where the conversation came from, he pointed to where Schnurr was located when she was shot. Schnurr claims she was the only one questioned about her belief in God.
I tend to believe the people who were there. And I know that eyewitnesses and firsthand accounts are not always accurate, but
I believe her account.
I think that
you
have to use scrutiny.
I think she would remember if somebody else was asked that immediately after her. It would be very striking to experience that.
Very.
So I believe that she was the only one asked. In the immediate aftermath, many unfounded claims were made by anti-government commentators, evangelicals, and others in extremist religious and political movements like the Phelps of the Westboro Baptist Church and televangelist Jerry Falwell.
Westboro's founder and then leader, Fred Phelps, made repeated unfounded claims that both Harris and Klebold were gay, such as two filthy FAGS slaughtered 13 people at Columbine High. Very,
Falwell said the same thing.
classic Christian.
Falwell also claimed that Harris and Klebold were, quote, two filthy FAGS. Falwell supposedly later retracted this statement, but there's no evidence of the retraction that I was able to find.
I doubt that. Maybe they retracted it publicly, but I don't think
believe
that
he
they
retracted
cared at
it.
all.
No, I also don't think he really cared. Falwell is not really, not somebody I would consider a good guy.
Conspiracy theories also arose, claiming that the massacre had been staged, that both Harris and Klebold were government agents attempting to promote tougher gun control laws, that there was a mysterious third shooter that has never been identified, and that the massacre was some kind of Jewish conspiracy, somehow, due to Klebold's mother being Jewish.
Political commentator and conspiracy theorist Alex Jones implied that the U.S. government had perpetrated Columbine and has claimed that, quote, the Columbine school shootings were 100% false flag. He would later be subjected to a $1.4 billion damages and fines after calling Sandy Hook parents crisis actors while making similar claims that the Sandy Hook shooting was a false flag.
Idiot.
Yeah, broke idiot now.
Yep. In the days after the shooting, media speculation regarding motivations was outrageously sensationalistic. The media report suggested a wide variety of motives, including goth culture, video games, movies, television, Eminem, and Marilyn Manson. Early media reports alleged that the shooters were Manson fans and were wearing Manson t-shirts during the massacre, a claim that was false. I heard all of that stuff. Speculation in national media and among the public led many to believe that Manson's music and imagery were the shooter's primary motivation, despite reports that the two were not big fans and preferred bands like KMFDM.
You can actually see Klebold here wearing a KMFDM shirt.
What?
KMFDM is an industrial band led by German multi-instrumentalist Sascha Konietzko, who issued a statement following the reports that KMFDM was against war, oppression, fascism, and violence against others, and that none of us condone Nazi beliefs whatsoever. And I included my favorite KMFDM song in this article, which is the song Dogma.
Marilyn Manson and other entertainers were widely criticized after the shooting by religious and political figures. Under mounting media pressure in the days after Columbine, Manson postponed 5 North American tour dates out of respect for the victims and their families. And in an interview with Michael Moore for the documentary film Bowling for Columbine, in which he was asked, if you were to talk directly to the kids at Columbine, what would you say to them if they were here right now? And Manson replied, I wouldn't say a single word to them. I would listen to what they had to say, because that's what no one did.
Parents of some of the victims filed unsuccessful lawsuits over films like The Basketball Diaries, which includes a dream sequence with a student in a trench coat shooting his classmates. Harris and Klebold were reportedly both fans of the film Lost Highway, and Apocalypse Now was found in Harris's VCR after his death.
I mean, those are both good movies.
One of them was a good movie.
How dare you?
Oh, I
We are
dare.
not going to talk about your hatred for David Lynch anymore. I kind of brought that up.
I'll settle for not ever talking about David Lynch anymore.
All right.
Worst filmmaker ever.
Okay. You didn't need to say that. You know what upsets me. You know I love David Lynch. Whatever. Got the dog over here sighing.
In fact, I would, you know what? I'll one up myself, and I will say that he's less a filmmaker
Stop.
and more a film ruiner.
Oh my. This is a quote from Senator Jeff Sessions, chairman of the Subcommittee on Youth Violence, testifying at the Columbine tragedy in 1999.
On the Columbine. He did not testify at the Columbine tragedy.
Oh, we should probably cut this.
No, let's just leave it in. We're almost done. This is it.
Well,
This is
I'm
the
not
end.
laughing at victims. I hope everyone knows that. I don't do that. That's not the kind of person I am. Despite being accused of it by retards.
No, well, I'm going to have to cut that.
All right, well, you just fucking cut it then.
Anyway, read the thing.
This is a quote from Senator Jeff Sessions, chairman of the Subcommittee on Youth Violence, testifying on the Columbine tragedy in 1999. This is what he says. They are able to hook into the internet and play video games that are extraordinarily violent, that cause the blood pressure to rise and the adrenaline level to go up. Games that cause people to be killed and the players to die themselves. It is a very intense experience. They are able to get into internet chat rooms, and if there are no nuts, or, he didn't say that. And if there are no nuts or people of the same mentality in their hometown, hook up with people around the country.
Can I interject that I play a lot of video games, or I have, and I have never caused people to be killed, nor have I, as a player, ever died myself.
That's funny. I mean, the video game argument has made me roll my eyes since day one. It doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. They're able to rent from the video store, not just go down and see Natural Born Killers or The Basketball Diaries, but they're able to bring it home and watch it repeatedly. In this case, even maybe make their own violent film. Many have said this murder was very much akin to The Basketball Diaries, in which a student goes in and shoots others in the classroom. I have seen a video of that, and many others may have.
He sounds like the most out-of-touch old man that has ever been an out-of-touch old man.
He does. He really does.
They're able to watch the films at home.
They're able to hook into the internet.
They can rewind and watch it again, and then he can rewind and watch it again, and he would go nuts in today's. You don't even have to rewind anymore. You just hit the replay button. You just watch it over and over and over. You set it on a loop.
Insane. Got virtual reality now and AI. He would lose his mind.
Jeff Sessions was already living in a virtual reality.
Well,
all right.
That's it.
That about wraps it up for this 3-hour, 21-minute episode of Murder Talk Radio. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I hope you enjoyed. And we are going to go collapse into a pile now and not wake up.
Until we wake up.
Yeah, which will probably be in just a couple hours, unfortunately, because that seems to be what happens when you get old.
Speak for yourself.
I was.
Oh.
And for you. Because you're old.
I am kind of old, though.
You're getting there.
Whatever.
We're both getting there. I'm not old yet. Middle. I'm in the middle.
Gotta plug into the internet.
It does. It almost begs to be.
Oh, sorry. They're able to hook into the internet.
That quote
is literally the most.
That quote almost begs to be read in like a yokel-y accent.
It does.
They're able to hook into the internet, play video games that are extraordinarily violent. They cause the blood pressure to rise, adrenaline level to go up, games that cause people to be killed, and players to die themselves.
You remind me of that character in the Purge episode of Rick and Morty. He's like trying to read a screenplay to Morty. Do you want to hear my tale?
They can rent from the video store. It's evil.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen a video of that, and many others may have as well. Like, those were both Natural Born Killers and The Basketball Diaries were huge movies.
They were.
Others may have seen that as well. Yeah, Jeff Sessions. Other people have seen both.
I have seen a video of that.
Both of those now classic films. I don't think they caused anybody to kill anybody either. Anyway.
This would come straight from the chairman of the subcommittee on youth violence.
Yeah, it would. It's very 1999.
It's also very interesting in regards to...
okay. We gotta go to bed. We're just talking. We're so tired. We already said goodbye and we're just still talking.
All right, well, just cut it off and stuff.
No, I'm gonna leave this all in and I'm gonna wrap it again. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, that about wraps it up for the second time for this 3.5-hour Murder Talk Radio episode. I'm Parker Evans.
I'm Victoria Evans.
Good night, sleep tight, and don't let Jeff Sessions anywhere near you.